LoveLore Library. Chapter 729. However, Shenliang was rather unlucky. He originally thought that since the Yi family had a daughter like Princess Ding, he wouldn't be able to gain any benefits from doing some small business in Li City. Princess Consort would help him out a little on account of the Yi family. However, he didn't expect that once they arrived in Li City, the Yi family wouldn't settle down and caused a lot of trouble. As Shenliang was a concubine's son, he naturally learned to observe people's expressions from a young age. He also quickly understood that in Princess Ding's eyes, the Yi family was definitely not as important as they boasted. Based on their way of doing things, who knows when they would anger Ding Wangfu and she would be implicated. Thinking of this, Shenliang's original plan to operate these two shops was temporarily put aside. He could only wait and see. If the situation was really bad, it would be better to change places. Li City wasn't the only city in the northwest. Yili calmly listened to Yi Wenhua finish talking about these trivial matters. Then she nodded and smiled at Shenliang. Since that's the case, do well in Li City. Although Li City might not be good in other places, it is still more stable than other places. If you have any difficulties with your identity, you can go to the Han family and find their family head. Since Lin is my concubine sister, I am naturally happy that you are doing well. When Shenliang heard this, he hurriedly bowed to Yili and said, "Thank you, Princess Consort. Li City is so prosperous under the Prince and Princess Consort's rule. How can other places compare to it?" Hearing Princess Ding's words, Shenliang also calmed down. He also understood Princess Consort's meaning. The other people in the Yi family were other people. Princess Consort wouldn't vent her anger on him. If there were any difficulties, Princess Consort could also provide some help for the sake of her concubine sister. As long as he knew his limits. Actually, Shenliang was already satisfied with Yi Li's words. As a concubine's son, his life wasn't easy. Although he didn't have a rich life, he didn't want to be implicated by his father-in-law's family. Seeing the envy in his wife's eyes as she looked at Wang Fei, Shenliang secretly made up his mind to restrain his wife when they returned. He could not allow her to fool around with the Yi family and the Yi family. Yi Wangshe, who had been sitting silently at the side, finally couldn't hold it in any longer and called out. Yili faintly raised her eyebrows. Qing Shuang, who was standing behind her, couldn't help but raise her chin and say, "Madam Yi, it's fine that old Madam Yi and Master Yi are our Wang Fei's elders, but you don't have any relationship with our Wang Fei. I'm afraid it's inappropriate for you to call her by her maiden name." Yi Wangshe's face turned red. She forced a smile and said, "Miss, what are you saying? I am the stepmother of the princess. Why can't you call me by my name?" Qing Shuang sneered and said, "Madam Yi was only promoted from a concubine to a wife. The aristocratic families with a little bit of fame don't recognize the rule of a concubine being promoted as a wife. You can't even be considered a stepmother, right? You can barely be considered a concubine mother. Our Wang Fei is now Princess Ding. In the Yi family, she is the legitimate daughter of the Yi family. What right do you have to call her that? It's fine that you didn't know the rules in the past. You relied on the fact that you had a Jiaoyi daughter so others couldn't say anything. Now, Madam Yi, you still don't know the rules. If not, the Yi family's matters were not handled properly. Although the Dechu state didn't forbid the promotion of a concubine as the legal wife like the previous dynasty, the heads of the aristocratic families didn't recognize and wouldn't do such a thing. So in the Chu capital, although no one said anything on the surface, they didn't think highly of Yi Wangshe in the dark. Yi Wangshe was mercilessly poked at her sore spot by Qing Shuang. Her face turned even uglier. She was about to say something with an embarrassed expression when Yi Wenhua said faintly, "Call her Wang Fei." Although Yi Wangshe didn't dare, she didn't dare to contradict her husband in front of her mother-in-law. She could only call her Wang Fei in a low voice. Yili nodded faintly and said, "What does Madame Wang want to say?" Yi Wangshi's mouth twitched and the expression on her face stiffened. It was fine if others called her Madame Yi, but Yili only called her Madame Wang. This was no different from calling her Wangshi directly. Although her heart was full of hatred, Wang could only suppress the anger in her heart and said with a smile, "Wang Fei, it's like this. Your brother is about to turn 20 years old. But he's still idle at home. So, I'm wondering if Wang Fei can arrange a job for Rong, so that he can work harder." Hearing this, old Madame Ye's heart was moved and she looked up at Yili. Yi Wangshi gave Yi Rong a look. Perhaps it was because she had taught Yi Rong before he came, but he didn't make trouble. He said to Yili obediently, "Third sister, Rong, has grown up. He can share the burden of third sister and brother-in-law." Yili looked at the fat Yi Rong with a smile and asked, "Oh. Then. Rong, what do you want to do?" Yi Rong's eyes lit up and said happily, "Rong, wants to be the commander of the guards in the city." Qin Feng, who was behind Yili, twitched his mouth and looked at Yi Rong's fat body. He thought in his heart, "You still want to be the commander of the guards in Li City? Any small soldier in the city can beat you until you can't get up." Yili smiled and said, "You have ambition. Why do you want to be the commander of the guards?" Yi Rong said proudly, "A few days ago, I met a boy. I heard that he was the grandson of some general." Chapter 730. After sending off the Yi family, Qin Feng asked, "Why is Princess Consort so polite to them?" Qin Feng followed Yili later. Even though he didn't understand the relationship between the Yi family and Yili, he could tell that Princess Consort didn't have such deep feelings for the Yi family as she did for the Su family. She even had a trace of disgust towards them. From Qin Feng's point of view, since Princess Consort disliked the Yi family, there was no need for her to be entangled with them. She could just get someone to throw them out. Yili waved her hand and said lightly, "No matter what, the Yi family and I are blood-related relatives. If we are too straightforward, the world will think that the Prince Ding mansion is cold-blooded and heartless. They won't be able to cause any waves. Send a few people to watch in secret. If Yi Rong dares to cause any trouble in Li City, don't be so courteous. You don't have to be polite. Teach me a good lesson." Qin Feng nodded in agreement. He turned around and ordered people to secretly watch the Yi residence. However, when the Yi family returned to the Yi residence, they didn't calm down. Old Mistress Yi angrily accused Yili of being unfilial. Yi Wangshi also cried and said that Yili didn't care about her brothers. Yi Wenhua's head started to hurt from all the noise. Shen Liang took a few glances, then pulled Yilin, who still wanted to speak, back to his own courtyard. In his heart, he was planning to move out of the Yi residence in 2 days and find another smaller courtyard to live in so that he could start his own business. If he continued to stay in the Yi residence, even if he was lucky enough to make a fortune in the future, it would be a wedding dress for Yi Rong. Yi Wenhua massaged his temples and said in a low voice, "All right, we've been in Li City for so many days. The Prince Ding mansion didn't treat us badly. Can't you all stop?" Actually, it was impossible to say that Yi Wenhua didn't have any ambitions. If he didn't have any ambitions, he wouldn't have allowed Yi Wangshi to manipulate Yi Ying to hook up with Mo Jingli. However, after living in the countryside for the past few years and leaving a bustling place like the capital, his mind, which had been dazzled by the prosperity of the capital, gradually became clearer. In these few years, Yi Wenhua had figured out many things. If it wasn't for his daughter, Yili, his family wouldn't even be able to leave the capital alive, let alone being demoted to commoners. He also thought about how he was able to become a minister in the past 20 years. In the later period, he had monopolized more, but in the early stages, he couldn't do it without the support of the Su family. If it wasn't for the support of the son-in-law of the Su family, how could those rich and powerful people in the capital think highly of a poor student like him? As a result, he felt even more sorry for his first wife, who had passed away early. He felt even more guilty towards his daughter, Yi Li. After hearing what Yi Li had done in these few years, even Yi Wenhua had to admit that this daughter he didn't care about was capable. He felt sad and guilty, but he also felt proud. The crying in the hall stopped. Old Mistress Yi was so angry that her face turned red. She pointed at Yi Wenhua and said, "Didn't treat her badly. Look at the Prince Ding mansion. Look at our broken courtyard. Take a look at the people in the Su family. Take a look at what you are like as their father. How many people in Li City think highly of you, Princess Ding's father?" Yi Wangshe quickly stepped forward and said, "Old mistress is right. Rong is the princess's only brother. But now, he can't even be compared to a general's grandson in Li City. I don't have the face to go out and see people. If you don't have the face to go out, then go somewhere else." Yi Wenhua said angrily. How could he not know what his mother said? But the Yi family had to be as capable as the Su family. Which one of the Su family's brothers wasn't capable? Even the youngest, Su Qingyan, went to the northwest when he was in his teens. No one stayed in Li City to enjoy life. If Yi Rong was really capable, even if he wasn't Princess Ding's brother, the Prince Ding mansion wouldn't reject him. It's all because of you, an ignorant woman, who spoiled this evil child. Yi Wenhua's face turned even uglier. Seeing Yi Rong sitting on the side without a care, the anger in his heart rose. She casually picked up the feather duster that was placed not far away and swung it at Yi Rong. Yi Rong was caught off guard by the slap and immediately cried out in pain. He kept shouting, "Grandmother, save me! Mother, save me! Rong is going to die." Yi Wangshe and old Madame Ye's heart ached for Yi Wenhua. Old Madame Yi scolded, "What are you doing? Are you going to kill your own son for Yi Li, that girl who got married? Do you want the Yi family to die without descendants? You might as well beat this old woman to death." Yi Wangshe also hugged her son and burst into tears. "Master, you are so cruel. Ding Wangfei is your biological daughter. Could it be that Rong is not your biological son?" Hearing the crying in front of him and seeing the proud smile on Yi Rong's face, Yi Wenhua only felt powerless. Yi Wenhua, who had never been tough in front of his mother and wife, failed this time. He threw down the things in his hands in disappointment, and with a wave of his sleeves, he turned around and went back to his courtyard to read. Outside the door, Shenliang and Yi Lin stood together and listened to the crying inside. Shenliang lowered his head and looked at his wife with an indifferent expression. He asked, "Look at this place. Do you still want to stay here?" Yi Lin opened her mouth and finally felt a little unwilling. Living here made her the younger sister of the sixth miss of the Yi family, Princess Ding. Chapter 731. Since Mo Xiuyao took down Feihong Pass, the anxious occupation immediately changed. The two armies besieging Feihong Pass were beaten to a pulp. After the winter came, the northern tribes' army slowed down. Once winter came, the northern tribes' territory would be covered in ice. Although they had occupied a large area in the north of Dechu State, these places had been destroyed by them in the past 6 months. So when winter came, the northern tribes' army began to run out of food. Mo Xiuyao defeated the besieging northern tribes and Xiling army and headed east to the Chu capital without stopping. Before that, the army led by Murong Xin was gradually approaching the Chu capital. On the other hand, the 300,000 soldiers led by He Su bypassed the Chu capital and directly clashed with Wei Chen's army in the north. They cut off the northern region army's retreat. Although the appearance of these two armies did not directly solve the siege of the Chu capital, it eased the enemy's attack. The defenders of Dechu State, who had been fighting hard for more than a month, breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, something even more shocking happened in the northern region. The current king of the northern region, Enchanting's queen, who was the princess of the northern region tribe, and her children all died overnight. But strangely, the children of his concubine were safe and sound. Although the people of the northern region were brave and not wise, they were not stupid. Soon, the news that Enchanting killed his wife began to spread in the northern region kingdom. Because Enchanting was not from the northern region, and after he unified the northern region, he appointed many Central Plains people. The seeds of discord between the Central Plains people and the northern region people had been planted long ago. Now that they suddenly broke out, Enchanting had a headache for a while. However, less than 2 days after Enchanting suppressed these rumors, his children and concubines also died. This time, it seemed to be done by the people of the northern region. But whether Enchanting thought it was done by the people of the northern region or framed them, he could only suppress this matter again. Otherwise, the conflict between the people of the Central Plains and the people of the northern region would erupt more fiercely next time. In the study room, Enchanting looked at the invitation that had just been sent in front of her and almost ground her teeth to pieces. It was a black card with gold paint, with golden clouds and flying dragons drawn on the back. The content of the post was very simple. There were only a few words: if others don't offend me, I won't offend them. If someone offends me, I'll return it 1,000 times over. The few lines of bold and flamboyant words looked unrestrained and domineering. It was more like an undisguised provocation. Enchanting clenched her teeth and crushed the post into pieces. Mo Xiaoyao. Enchanting's originally elegant face no longer had the slightest trace of a smile, only endless distortion and hatred. Mo Xiaoyao's sudden attack was definitely enough to break Enchanting's heart. Not only his wife and concubines, but also all his children. Not a single one of his 4 sons and 5 daughters were spared. Enchanting knew that this was Mo Xiaoyao's revenge for what she had done to Yili in West Hill. But people were always like this. They did not care about other people's pain, but when it came to themselves, they could not bear it. Young master. In the study room, a few men who were obviously from the Central Plains stood solemnly, looking at Enchanting's twisted face worriedly. They were all descendants of the previous dynasty's officials who had been loyal to the Lin family for generations. After Enchanting established a foundation in the northern region, he naturally placed them in important positions in the northern region's imperial court. Compared to the people of the northern region who fought desperately on the battlefield, they were Enchanting's true trusted subordinates. Although they, who claimed to be the orthodox people of the Central Plains, were a little uncomfortable with the help of the barbarians of the northern region, they were born at the wrong time. For 100 years, the Central Plains had been guarded by the Prince Ding mansion. Their ancestors could not move at all. Back then, the Prince Ding mansion had suffered a great loss, so they found the opportunity to control the entire northern region. Otherwise, they would still be hiding in the dark as a hermit family. Enchanting sneered and said, Mo Xiaoyao sent the invitation. The people of the Prince Ding mansion are really everywhere. What a good move. One of them hesitated for a moment, then asked, this is a matter between the queen and the young princes. Is it Mo Xiaoyao's doing? Killing the whole family. Mo Xiaoyao is so vicious. Even people like them could not help but tremble at Mo Xiaoyao's ruthlessness. Not long ago, Mo Xiaoyao had just killed half of the nobles in the Emperor of Xiling City. Now, he had even killed everyone in the royal family of the northern region except for Enchanting. It was undeniable that such methods were frightening. Could it be that Mo Xiaoyao really cares about Princess Ding so much? Or did he intend to do this all along and just happen to find this excuse? Someone asked suspiciously. Enchanting was silent. Actually, he had only met Mo Xiaoyao and Yili once in Xiling last year. However, he could clearly feel that Mo Xiaoyao cared about Princess Ding. More importantly, it was because of the influence of the Su family behind Princess Ding in the Prince Ding mansion that he would make a move on Yili. However, he did not expect that this time, he would suffer a double loss. After a moment of silence, Ren Qining asked, "How is the battle at the Chu capital?" Reporting to young master, "Our troops have already surrounded the Chu capital for more than a month. We believed that we would be able to break through the Chu capital in a few days. However, an army suddenly appeared out of nowhere and cut off the Chu capital's path to the Purple Thorns Pass. This army only has 200,000 people, but the person leading them is not ordinary. They occupy 3 small cities in the middle, forming a triangle. The Ling army has suffered heavy losses. More importantly, they occupy the main road and obstruct us. Our supplies and reinforcements cannot keep up. I'm afraid that the time it will take to break through the Chu capital will be delayed." They never thought that the army could change the entire situation. No matter how powerful it was only 200,000 people. Compared to the million soldiers in the north, it was not enough. It would only delay the time it would take to break through the city. Ren Qining frowned slightly and asked, "Who is the person leading the army?" According to what he knew, the Dechu state did not have many generals who could fight. Most of them had been taken to Jiangnan by Mo Jingli. Ling Huai and the others who had been stationed at the Purple Thorns Pass were now trapped in the Chu capital and could not come out to lead troops. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "We only know that this person is called He Su. Now that the world is in chaos, Mo Jingli took many people with him when he left the Chu capital. Our people could not find out anything about him in such a short time." "Can't find out anything?" Ren Qining rubbed his chin and asked thoughtfully, "Then, could it be Mo Xiuyao's people?" This. Everyone was silent and looked at each other with suspicion. Although those soldiers did not seem like the Mahist army, who knew if there were other soldiers hidden in the Prince Ding mansion? Also, to suddenly attack like this, it was clear that they wanted to delay the time it took for the north to break through the Chu capital. And now, Mo Xiuyao had also set out for the Chu capital. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that they were trying to buy time for Mo Xiuyao. Ren Qining stood up and said, "Pass down the order, immediately mobilize all the troops. Within 3 days, the army that I defeated will attack the Chu capital at full force. We must take the Chu capital before Mo Xiuyao's army arrives." Everyone acknowledged. "Young master, your plan." Ren Qining narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "If Mo Xiuyao wants the Chu capital, he will have to see if I agree. Send someone to send a message to the 7th prince of the northern tribes. In 10 days, I will invite him to the Purple Thorns Pass." Chapter 732. Everyone looked at each other, their eyes full of confusion. Although they did not understand their master's thoughts, they still respectfully left to handle matters. Although no one knew what the northern tribe's commander, the 7th prince, and the northern region's king, Ren Qining, had met at Zijing Pass, 2 secret letters were sent to the west on the same day. One letter was sent to Mo Xiuyao, who was still in the army, while the other letter was sent to the Prince Ding mansion in the northwestly city. In the military tent, Mo Xiuyao leaned lazily on the chair, reading the letter in his hand. Sitting down, Marquis Nan, Lu Jingxian, Feng Zhiyao and the others were all guessing what had been said in the letter that made the prince's expression become so profound. Feng Zhiyao was forced to stand up by the other elders' threatening gazes and asked, "Prince, did something happen?" Mo Xiuyao looked at him with a smile that was not a smile and said, "Something did happen. 3 days ago, Yilu Yi of the northern tribes and Ren Qining of the northern Jin kingdom had a chat at Zijing Pass. Everyone understood that these 2 people walking together was not as simple as an ordinary chat. This clearly meant that the 2 families were preparing to join forces to deal with the Prince Ding mansion. Marquis Nan frowned and said, "But what did Ren Qining and Yilu Yi come to an agreement?" Mo Xiuyao said. They had a secret conversation. What they talked about was not written in the letter. But I can guess a bit. It was nothing more than for the northern tribes to help block the Mahist army's advance, so that the northern region has time to take Chujing. Feng Zhiyao did not understand. Would Yilu Yi be so stupid? Using his own troops to block Rinqining. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, he's not stupid. The northern tribe's army is facing us now. They have no choice but to use all their strength. Unless they can defeat the Mahist army, their chances of successfully taking Chujing are not high. But the northern region is different. The northern region is in the opposite direction from us. Before we enter the Chu capital, they won't have any conflicts. Ren Qining must have given Yilu Yi other benefits in exchange for him giving up on Chu capital. What kind of benefits? The Chu capital was not some other place. Even though the Dechu state's royal family had moved the capital, it was still very important to the people of the Dechu state. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and laughed. Maybe he gave up some land to the northern tribes. Or perhaps after the Chu capital is conquered, the two families can deal with the Prince Ding mansion in a reasonable manner. LV Songxian frowned and asked worriedly, if that's the case, it's indeed very disadvantageous for us. What plans does Prince have? Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, our plan is to get to Chu capital as soon as possible. We can't let the northerners get there first. As for other plans, young Master Qingchen would naturally consider them. As for this Ren Qining, the lesson we gave him this time was not enough. Everyone present, including Feng Zhiyao at Xiling, looked curiously at Mo Xiuyao. Their expressions were questioning what Prince had done to him. Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, nothing much. I had Qin Feng send people to kill all of his wives and children. Everyone was silent. Similarly, in the study of the Prince Ding mansion in Glass City, Su Qingchen, Su Hongyu, and the others were all present. Yili was wearing a thick ferret cloak and hugging a heater. She was also sitting at the side listening to their conversation. Su Qingze put down the letter in his hand. His usually expressionless face frowned and said, if the northern tribes and the northern region really join hands to deal with the Mahist army, I'm afraid it won't be so easy for the Mahist army to reach Chu capital next month. Can Chu capital last that long? Su Hongyu stroked his beard and frowned slightly. I'm afraid it won't be that easy. Now, we can only hope that Prince Ding can be faster. And the northern region, He Su is from the Prince Ding mansion. Yili nodded and said with a smile, he is indeed from the Prince Ding mansion. Su Hongyu nodded and said, that's good. With him and General Murong, they should be able to resolve Chu capital's predicament. If not, then it can only be heaven's will. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, Father, you don't have to be so worried. Even if Chu capital is occupied by the northern region, Prince Ding will definitely be able to take it back. Furthermore, it's better for the northern region to take over than the northern tribes. Once the northern tribes entered the central plains, they did everything they could. Wherever the army went, there would be rivers of blood. As long as Ren Qining still wanted to rule the central plains, he would not be able to kill as much as the northern tribes. Su Hongyu could only think this way. He shook his head and said, we don't have to care about military matters. However, if the northern tribes and the northern region really form an alliance, it will be very disadvantageous for us. This disadvantage was not only referring to the rescue of Chu capital this time, but also in the future. Qingchen, do you have any ideas? Su Qingchen and Yili looked at each other and smiled faintly. I do have some ideas. The northern tribes and the northern region were not on the same side as each other. The conflict between the crown prince of the northern tribes and the seventh prince, as well as the differences between the people of the central plains and the people of the northern territories, we can do something about these. Su Hongyu raised his eyebrows and said, you mean, to divide them from the inside? Yili nodded and said with a smile, Big Brother is right. The Northern Tribe's 7th Prince Yilu Yi is currently leading the army. After today's battle, Yilu Ye's reputation in the Northern Tribes will definitely rise, overshadowing the Crown Prince Yilu Hong. Yilu Hong and Yilu Yi have always been at odds. How can he tolerate this? He will definitely be very dissatisfied with Yilu Yi. If someone says anything to the king of the Northern Tribes. Su Hongyan asked, is this plan feasible? Does the Prince Ding mansion have any spies in the Northern Tribe's royal family? Yili shook her head and said helplessly, there is no such thing. The Northern Tribes are very xenophobic. If you are not a member of the Northern Tribes, you will not be able to gain their trust. However, the Crown Prince of the Northern Tribes has our people by his side, and Yilu Hong's relationship with the Prince Ding mansion is much better than Yilu Ye's. Oh. Su Hongyan was curious. Although he had been in the Northwest for so many years, he did not know that the Prince Ding mansion had spies by the Crown Prince's side. Su Qingshan thought for a moment and asked, is it Princess Ronghua? When Princess Sharon's daughter, Princess Ronghua, was conferred the title of princess, she married the Crown Prince of the Northern Tribes, Yilu Hong. However, when Princess Ronghua was in the capital, she did not have a good relationship with the Prince Ding mansion and Yili, so it was not easy to guess this relationship. However, it had been so many years. Whether Princess Ronghua had not changed was another matter. Is she reliable? Yili smiled and said, it doesn't matter if Princess Ronghua is reliable or not. We don't need her to do anything for us. As long as the people around her are reliable, it's fine. After all, Princess Ronghua was not a trained spy. If there were too many things, it would be easy to give the game away. At that time, the Prince Ding mansion sent 2 spies, one in the open and one in the dark, to help Princess Ronghua secretly. Princess Ronghua naturally knew about the open one, but no one told her about the secret one. Of course, all of this was not really just to help Princess Ronghua, but to meet the needs of the current situation. Now that the capital of Dechu State had moved, almost half of the country was gone. And the news from the Northern Tribes showed that Yilu Hong did not have the slightest intention of neglecting Princess Ronghua. It could be seen that Princess Ronghua had been doing very well in the Northern Tribes these years. That's good. Su Qingshan nodded with satisfaction. Yili smiled and said, then I will send someone to the Northern Tribes in person to see Yilu Hong. Maybe I can help him secretly. If everything goes well, in 2 or 3 months, Yilu Yi should be finished as the commander of the Northern Tribes army. Su Qingshan asked, I'm afraid it's not so easy to persuade Yilu Yi. Do you want me to go in person? This. Yili frowned. Now, many things in the Northwest were inseparable from her eldest brother. But if she did not send someone with enough weight, she was afraid that Yilu Hong would not understand. If it weren't for her pregnancy, Yili would have gone there herself. Su Hongyan said, the Northwest can't do without Qingchen and my eldest brother. If Li trusts uncle, I'll go. Second uncle, the Northwest is bitter and cold, this trip. Su Hongyan smiled and said, Li, are you looking down on me or what? Is uncle a person who can't bear hardships? Yili naturally knew that although Su Hongyan did not talk much, he was really eloquent and was a suitable candidate. She looked at Su Qingshan and Su Hongyu hesitantly. Su Hongyu nodded and said, so, second brother will go. Hearing Su Hongyu say so, Yili could only nod. She thought for a moment and said, so, Mo Hua is also in the Northwest. I'll let him bring some people with him to accompany second uncle. Mo Hua was originally the commander of the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion. With him and his people protecting Su Hongyan, there was no need to worry about his safety. Even if the plan failed, Mo Hua could protect Su Hongyan and safely return to the Northwest. Okay. Knowing that Yili was thinking about his safety, Su Hongyan did not refuse. Most of the tribes in the northern region had beasts as their totem, but none of them had a dragon as their totem, which was an illusory divine creature. Lang Haoyu leaned against the cold city wall and said with a smile, because the current king of the northern region, Ren Qining, claims to be the orphan of the royal family of the previous dynasty. What? Ling Huai and Du Qua were both shocked. Ling Huai said with some doubts, the previous dynasty has been destroyed for 200 years. Can this Ren Qining's identity be taken seriously? Lang Haoyu shrugged and said with a smile, who knows? Anyway, he is from the Central Plains. No one can control whether he is a descendant of the previous dynasty or not. If he wants to fight for the world, he must have a reason. Ling Huai and Du Qua looked at each other. Du Qua smiled and said, second young Master Lang is right. No matter who he is, he has no right to fight for the Central Plains with the reputation of being the orphan of the previous dynasty just because he brought the people of the northern region to attack the Central Plains. It's better to start a rebellion. It won't be so ugly. As a legitimate descendant of the previous dynasty's royal family, he brought a group of barbarians to attack the Central Plains. It wouldn't sound good if word got out. Moreover, the self-proclaimed orthodox scholars of the Central Plains had always despised the barbarians. Ren Qining's actions were even more unacceptable to the orthodox scholars. Lang Haoyu smiled unruly and said casually, the northern region is not an iron plate now. The people of the northern region have always been at odds with the Central Plains people who Ren Qining put in an important position. This time, Prince has put on a good show in the northern region. I'm afraid that the headquarters of the northern region is now divided on the inside. Oh. As soon as these words came out, Ling Huai and Du Qua couldn't help but perk up their ears curiously. Naturally, they didn't know that Prince Ding, who was still hundreds of miles away, had already done something to the northern region. This was originally not a secret, but now that the Chu capital was besieged, the news was blocked, so the people in the Chu capital didn't receive the news at all. Lang Haoyu didn't hide it. A malicious smile appeared on his lips and he said, a few days ago, Prince had people kill all of Ren Qining's wives and children. Within a few days, all of Ren Qining's concubines and children were also killed. Now, the royal family of the northern region can be said to be Ren Qining alone. Du Qua and Ling Huai were shocked. Prince Ding's actions were not only ruthless, but also endless. This was not as simple as taking revenge on Ren Qining. It was likely that the people in the northern region secretly blamed the deaths of the northern region's princess and children on Ren Qining and the Central Plains people. In the eyes of outsiders, the deaths of Ren Qining's concubines and children were more like the revenge of the people of the northern region. Even if Ren Qining herself knew the truth, how many people would believe her if she told them the truth was another matter. When Prince Ding came up with this plan, he was probably still far away in West Hill. It was not a lie that he could so easily manipulate the hearts of the people of the northern Jin kingdom and strategize to determine victory from 1,000 miles away. Du Qua and Ling Huai looked at each other and couldn't help but sigh. Prince Ding was so talented and wise. The brothers Mo Jingqi and Mo Jingli really deserved to lose. Lang Haoyu leaned against the wall and looked at the camp of the northern region in the distance. A cold smile flashed across his eyes. The country had already fallen, so they should just stay put. Trying to revive the country was just a dream. They actually wanted to break into the Chu capital and let the people of the northern region take over the Central Plains. Sooner or later, they will all die. The royal family of the northern region was almost wiped out. The news of the alliance between the northern region and the northern tribes naturally spread to the south. However, the two forces of the south, Mo Jingli and Lei Zhenting, did not do anything other than gloat. Lei Zhenting even sneered. He only felt that the depression in his heart for the past 2 months had dissipated a lot. If not for Ren Qining's interference, even if the Emperor of Xiling changed hands, his forces would not have been wiped clean by Mo Xiuyao. However, his attention was not focused on the north. Instead, it was focused on the Emperor of Xiling, who had just moved the capital to An City, and Mo Jingli in the south. Mo Jingli was still well behaved. However, after moving the capital, the Emperor of Xiling was somewhat restless. The Jinan Palace's influence in the imperial court had been mostly reduced by Mo Xiuyao. Now, Ting Feng was actually somewhat unable to suppress the Emperor of Xiling. Although the Western Tomb had lost a third of its land in the north, Enchanting had also taken over a large area of land in the south of Dechu State. After Murongxin led his troops to the north, he even opened up a path to the southwest. Once again, he connected the land occupied by Enchanting to the Western Tomb. In this way, the Western Tomb did not suffer too much from this battle other than losing the imperial city. However, Enchanting knew that the biggest winner of this battle was actually Mo Xiuyao. Once he took over the Chu capital, the Prince Ding Mansion would have 2 imperial cities under its control. Its power would immediately surpass that of the other countries. However, even though he understood this, Enchanting could not find the time to deal with Mo Xiuyao. He could only grit his teeth and endure. However, after Ren Qining personally came to the Chu capital to supervise the battle, the northern army's attacks became more and more intense. The defenders in the city had been under siege for nearly 3 months. Not only were they tired, but the food reserves in the city were also gradually running low. Not to mention the millions of people in the city who also needed to eat. Even on the day of the new year, whether it was the people or the defenders, each person only had a bowl of plain porridge. The days of defending the city became more and more difficult. In order to boost morale, the elderly Duke Hua had to personally supervise the battle. Chapter 734. It dragged on until the 91st day of the first month. The Chu capital had been defending for 3 months and 10 days since the northern region's army arrived, a total of 103 days. Perhaps knowing that the Chu capital was truly an arrow at the end of its flight, the northern region's army took turns to go into battle without any signs of tiredness. The morale of the siege also increased. On the city wall, Ling Huai and Duke Hua stood side by side. Their determined faces were full of fatigue and hardships. Behind them were Lang Haoyu, Ling Qingyu, Wei Lin, and the other young generals. Lang Haoyu, who had always been unruly, had a rare solemn expression on his face. Ling Huai looked at the northern region's army that was eyeing the city covetously and said helplessly, "Old Duke, I'm afraid we can't take it anymore." There was not only helplessness in his words, but also some regret. They had endured for 3 months without the Chu capital falling. As generals and subjects, they had not let down the Dechu state. It was a pity that they could not wait for the Mahist army's reinforcements. A trace of sadness flashed across Duke Hua's old face. He looked at the fluttering flags in the distance and said in a calm and determined voice, "Even if the Chu capital falls, this old man will live and die with the Chu capital." Ling Huai nodded. Old Duke is right. This general also has the same thoughts. If the city stands, the people will live. If the city falls, the people will die. Lang Haoyu strolled down the city wall. The current situation was indeed a little troublesome. It was naturally not difficult for him to escape alone, but Lang Haoyu had also experienced a lot in the past few months of defending the city. He was also a descendant of a general. Although he had never been on the battlefield before, it was impossible for him to abandon his comrades who had fought side by side and escape at this time. Moreover, his father and wife were still in the city. "Prince, if you hadn't come, I, Lang Heir, would have really died here." Lang Haoyu smiled bitterly. "Second brother. Lang Haoyu was stopped by a voice behind him as soon as he turned the corner. Lang Haoyu could guess who was behind him without looking back. She pursed her lips and turned to look at Lang Qingyu, who was wearing a white robe with a cold expression. The white rolling snow lion battle robe was also stained with a lot of dust, making it look even more murderous. Lang Haoyu had always had nothing to say to this brother of his. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "General Lang, what's the matter?" Lang Qingyu frowned. "I have something to tell you." Lang Haoyu raised his eyebrows. Ignoring the dust on the wall, he leaned back and said lightly, "I'm all ears." Lang Qingyu looked at him and asked, "What do you look down on me for?" Lang Haoyu smiled but didn't say anything. Of course, he looked down on him. As the son of a concubine and the son of the first wife, they were destined to have a bad relationship. Lang Haoyu hadn't been doted on since he was young, so he naturally disliked Lang Qingyu, who was doted on and cultivated by his father. When had Lang Qingyu, the son of the first wife, ever taken Lang Haoyu, the younger brother of a concubine, seriously? When Lang Haoyu gradually grew up, he befriended Imo Xiaoyao, Feng San, and the others. After learning some skills, his initial dislike for Lang Qingyu turned into disdain. So what if you're praised by father? You're doted on and cultivated by father, but your martial arts aren't as good as mine. Even if you're on the battlefield, you might not be able to fight better than me. It's just that I don't care to compete with you. Therefore, Lang Haoyu was very carefree after saving Lang Huai at Purple Thorns Pass. It was like a person who could only feel good in secret, but now he could feel good in front of everyone in the world. The feeling was self-evident. Especially when he saw Lang Qingyu's gloomy and cold face every time Lang Huai praised him, the joy in Lang Haoyu's heart doubled. Lang Qingyu snorted. "It doesn't matter if you look down on me. Anyway, I don't know if I can survive this time. If I die, take good care of father." Ha! Lang Haoyu was stunned. He thought Lang Qingyu wanted to quarrel with him or something. It turned out that he was here to leave his last words. Lang Haoyu pursed his lips and waved away the strange feeling in his heart. "If you want to leave your last words, go find your son. What does it have to do with me?" Then, he turned and walked forward. Lang Qingyu's voice came from behind. "In short, if I die in battle, you'll be the Lang family's only son. Take good care of father." Then, he turned and walked up the city wall without looking at Lang Haoyu's reaction. Lang Haoyu was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses and shouted at Lang Qingyu's back, "What does your death have to do with me? I don't care about your Lang family." Before Chu Jing, who was guarding the city, could take a breather, the Northern Region army began to attack the city again. This time, the attack was even more intense than before. They watched as the defenders on the city wall were shot down one by one. They watched as the army below the city wall crossed the moat and climbed up the city wall tower. After being shot down by the defenders, some people continued to climb up. The sounds of killing filled the entire city wall, and the thick smell of blood lingered in the air. Finally, under the heavy impact, the sturdy city gate collapsed, and a large group of Northern Region troops poured in. On the city wall tower, Du Qua picked up the silver spear in his hand and glanced at the people still fighting on the city wall tower. "Ling Huai! Guard the city wall tower." Ling Huai was stunned and hurriedly asked, "Old Duke, what are you?" Du Qua said in a deep voice, "This old man will go down and meet these Northern Region people." Then, without waiting for Ling Huai to refuse, he strode down the city wall tower. His light blue battle robe fluttered in the cold wind, making people feel as if they were seeing the Du Qua who was in his prime and galloping on the battlefield. The city gate was only so big. Although the city gate was broken, the Chu army guarding the city immediately rushed over, intending to block the Northern Region people. The two groups of people fought at the city gate. However, the northern region people were valiant and brave. How could these tired and hungry Chu state soldiers resist them? Chu Jing was beaten back step by step. The northern region soldiers continued to pour into the city. If this continued, there would be no point in guarding the city wall tower. Ling Huai could only order the soldiers to retreat into the city and fight on their own. This battle to defend the city had been fought for more than 3 months. At this point, it was already a battle to the death. In less than an hour, the sounds of killing had spread throughout the entire Chu capital. Although there was Ren Qining's order to restrain them, the soldiers of the northern region were not that strict. Many houses had been destroyed, and it was common for treasures to be stolen. If the citizens of the city resisted, they would also die under the blades of the northern region soldiers. This city that had flourished for hundreds of years had suddenly become hell. The smell of blood wafted through the air, and cries shook the heavens. The center of the Chu capital was the imperial palace. Now, there were not many guards left in the palace. The large imperial palace was so quiet that there was almost no one in sight. In the depths of the palace, a young man and woman sat in each other's arms. The young girl had a beautiful appearance. Unfortunately, half of her face was covered in scars, which made her beautiful appearance look even more strange. "Little brother, are you afraid?" The young girl was noble consort Lu's daughter, Princess Xin Ning. Sitting beside her was naturally noble consort Lu's eldest son, Mo Xiaoyun, who had been conferred the title of Prince Chongqing by Mo Jingli. Mo Xiaoyun shook his head and said, "I'm not afraid." "Sister, don't be afraid. I will accompany you." Mo Xiaoyun comforted his sister softly. The shouts outside the palace walls were getting closer and closer. A few guards rushed over, and one of them said in a deep voice, Princess, the northern region soldiers are about to attack. Your Highness and Princess, please follow us and leave this place." Chapter 735. Mo Xiaoyun shook his head and said indifferently, "There's no need. You guys should go and help Du Qua and General Lang. My sister and I won't be going anywhere." Princess Xin Ning held her brother's hand and nodded, "That's right. I'm the princess of Chu State. Even if I die, I want to die in the palace. You guys go yourselves. You guys won't be able to stop anything. It'll be a waste of your lives here." The guards looked at each other and understood that the prince and princess had made up their minds. The imperial household of the Chu had abandoned the people and the imperial household and fled. While these soldiers who had stayed behind did not have good feelings about the imperial household, they felt more respect for this brother and sister pair. They stood up and cupped their hands. "Since that's the case, Princess, take care." Looking at the departing figures of the guards, the palace regained its original tranquility. The brother and sister sat together. Although it was the cold of the first month, the palace was no longer as warm as before. The two of them leaned against each other and felt a little warmer. "I wonder how little brother is doing." Back then, they had stayed in the Chu capital, but little brother was taken away by Mo Jingli. He might have wanted to use this opportunity to control Mo Xiaoyun. Mo Xiaoyun said in a low voice, "He should be alive. I just hope he's safe and sound. I just can't accept it. I still haven't found that woman." Princess Xin Ning caressed the scar on her face with a disgusted expression. She still hadn't found that woman to take revenge. That woman who was originally her mother had ended up like this because of her. Even in death, she had to die with such an ugly scar. "Sister, in the city, fighting from dawn to dusk, more and more places were occupied by the people of the northern region. The remaining Chu army's area of activity was becoming smaller and smaller. Everyone had long felt despair and helplessness. Even more people charged into the northern region's army with bloody determination in their eyes. Even if they had to die, they wanted to drag a few people down with them. Outside the city, Enchanting stood on her horse and listened to the sounds of fighting in the city. The general next to her said, "The Chu people have always been weak. I didn't expect them to be so courageous. Fighting until now, they're about to be completely wiped out, yet they still refuse to surrender." Enchanting said indifferently, "It's not that they're weak, but they're resilient. The people of the Central Plains were not as brave as the people beyond the Great Wall, but they were tenacious and indomitable. Therefore, this rich land has been ruled by them for thousands of years." The northern general next to him seemed to be unconvinced, but he looked at Enchanting and didn't say anything. Suddenly, a flame-like spark blossomed in the sky, and a rumbling sound came from afar. Even the ground was faintly shaking. Enchanting sat up straight on his horse, he waved his whip and cursed, "Yelu Yi, that trash." The general next to him was shocked. "The Mahist army has arrived. Apart from the Black Cloud Cavalry, who else has such power?" Enchanting said bitterly and shouted, "Send more troops into the city. We must take Chu capital before the Mahist army arrives." "Yes." The people fighting in the city naturally saw the fireworks in the sky. Lang Haoyu's eyes lit up and he kicked away the northern soldiers in front of him. He flew to a high place and shouted, "The Mahist army is here. Open the west gate." Luckily, the west gate was still in the hands of the Chu army. Hearing this, all the Chu army soldiers were shocked. Soon, there were people who shouted, "The Mahist army is here. The Mahist army is here." The shouts quickly spread throughout the city, and even many people who were originally hiding in their homes cheered. Some people who knew martial arts even ran out to fight with the northern soldiers. As for the streets and alleys, there were even more northern soldiers who were hit with sticks. The west gate of Chu capital was opened, and the Chu army in the city also rushed to the west to ensure that the west gate would not be taken over by the northern soldiers before the Mahist army arrived. The Black Cloud Cavalry was as fast as the wind. Originally, it sounded like they were still a few miles away, but soon, they saw the black troops rushing into the city like a black whirlwind. The main road of Chu capital was very wide, and the Black Cloud Cavalry did not feel crowded at all. Wherever the black whirlwind went, a bloody light would appear, sweeping everything in its path. Seeing the Black Cloud Cavalry, Lang Haoyu finally let out a sigh of relief. He grabbed a Black Cloud Cavalry soldier and asked, "Has the army arrived?" He was so excited that the soldier almost rolled his eyes. He quickly opened his eyes and said, "The infantry is a bit slower. Our cavalry will go first." Lang Haoyu was slightly disappointed. "When will the army arrive?" The Black Cloud Cavalry said, "I don't know." "Who's leading the Black Cloud Cavalry?" "Third young Master Feng." Lang Haoyu threw away the Black Cloud Cavalry soldier and ran towards the west of the city. When he killed his way to the west gate, he saw Feng Zhiyao standing under the city gate with a smile. "Oh, it's rare to see second young Master Lang in such a sorry state." Saying he was in a sorry state was an understatement. Lang Haoyu was covered in blood, and there were wounds all over his body. Fortunately, there weren't any serious injuries, and it didn't affect his movements. He rolled his eyes at him and said, "Du Qua and the others are trapped near the palace. Quickly send people to save them." Feng Zhiyao's expression changed. He waved his hand and called for a group of people to enter the city. However, he himself had to stand guard at the city gates for the Mo family army that would arrive later. If the Mahist army arrived and the city gate was taken by the northern army, then it would be troublesome. Lang Haoyu took a deep breath and asked, "How many people did you bring?" Feng Zhiyao was helpless. "How many people can the Black Cloud Cavalry have?" 20,000. Lang Haoyu nodded. "It should be enough to wait until the prince arrives." Lang Haoyu naturally knew that the Black Cloud Cavalry valued quality over quantity. He ignored Feng Zhiao and waved his hand, bringing two groups of black cloud cavalry towards the city. Chapter 736. Because of the arrival of the black cloud cavalry, the victory that seemed to be within their grasp gradually became more difficult. The Chu capital that had been gradually losing seemed to have suddenly become much stronger. Even though the northern army outnumbered the Chu capital by more than 10 times, in these narrow city streets, it was futile no matter how many people they had. Moreover, the Chu army's understanding of the Chu capital was far above the northern barbarian army. Even if they could not chase the northern army out of the city, it was impossible for them to completely occupy the Chu capital in a short period of time. Feng Zhiao stood on the city gate tower and looked down at the battle in the city from above. He gradually discovered that the northern army had completely ignored the Chu army and were crazily charging towards the western part of the city. A cold smile appeared on his handsome face. "You want to take the western gate? How could it be that easy?" Enchanting, who was following behind Feng Zhiao, crossed his arms and looked at the northern army that was charging over. He said, "They want to take the western gate first and cut off the Mahist army's path into the city. Then they will deal with the defending army in the city." Feng Zhiao said with a smile, "Don't worry, before we left, the prince gave me a few good toys." However, Feng Zhiao said with a frown, "This toy seems to be a bit dangerous, using it in the city might be a bit." Enchanting did not have such misgivings. "What kind of time is it now? Why are you still worrying about these things? When they really charge over, we won't even be enough to deal with them." Feng Zhiao rubbed his chin and nodded. "That's right. Actually, I don't know what this toy is like either. You, take your things and block those fellows." He turned around and waved his hand, calling over a small Qilin captain that came with them. The Qilin members were naturally excited. They had obtained this item for quite some time, but they never had the chance to use it. After receiving Feng Zhiao's order, the squad leader waved his hand and immediately led a group of Qilin down the tower with a rectangular box in their hands. In the city, the soldiers of the northern region who received Renqining's order all rushed towards the tower of the west gate. However, from the street far away from the west gate, they only heard a loud bang followed by a series of explosions. Before the northern army could even figure out what was going on, they were blasted to bits and pieces of flesh and blood. If they were Central Plainsmen, they would at least have seen some fireworks and firecrackers. But the barbarians in the northern region lived a slightly better life than the primitive tribes before Renqining integrated the northern region. They had never seen such earth-shattering noises and destructive power. Many soldiers of the northern region were so frightened that they assumed that they had offended the heavenly god and that the heavenly god had sent down a bolt of lightning. Needless to say, those who were hit by the explosion were so scared that they knelt on the ground and didn't dare to get up. Uncivilized peoples were often more afraid of heaven and earth than the peoples of the Central Plains. After a series of explosions, the entire street was filled with the smell of gunpowder. The ground was also covered with soldiers who had been blasted into pieces. On the tower not far away, Enchanting's eyes widened in shock. He stammered, This thing was given to you by the prince." This was a little too frightening. He clearly saw that Qilin and the others had hidden something along the street. Those northern region people had become like this as soon as they entered. If Yili were here, she would definitely think that these effects were just a so-so. After many years of research in the secret Imperial Mausoleum, the best thing they had made was not even as effective as the first-hand grenade, let alone a powerful bomb like TNT, which could blow up a 6- or 7-story building with just 1 kilogram. As for the firearms developed in the underground palace of the Imperial Mausoleum, Yili was too lazy to even take them out. Whether it was the range or the accuracy, they were inferior to bows and arrows. It was better to wait for another 4 or 5 generations before thinking about it. However, to the people of this era who still knew how to play with fireworks and firecrackers, this effect was shocking enough. Feng Zhiyao nodded with a wooden face. At the same time, he concealed the shock in his heart. However, he could not help but curse Mo Xiaoyao in his heart. If he had such a powerful weapon, he should have taken it out sooner. In fact, Mo Xiaoyao was definitely wronged. Now, these things were purely handmade, and there was no flowing production line. It was already considered a high yield if 7 or 8 bombs could be made in a month. However, these things were not particularly lethal. Qilin's people had placed no less than 100 things on both sides of the street due to the earth-shattering lethality just now. It was too inconvenient to carry around and had a high production cost. Mo Xiaoyao really didn't plan on using something that wouldn't kill 3 people in an open area for the time being. The northern region soldiers could only be considered unlucky. With so many people squeezed into this narrow street, who else would they bomb if not him? The northern region people were not completely brainless. Soon, someone reacted and shouted, "This is a trick of the Central Plains people. Don't be afraid. Charge and kill them." The northern region people were brave. With someone taking the lead, they quickly got up and followed the leader to charge forward. The Qilin on the houses on both sides were not surprised. They smirked and viciously threw the black objects down. The black ball landed on the ground and exploded while the soldiers of the northern region were stunned for a moment. The soldiers closest to the ball were sent flying as expected. Then, another deafening explosion sounded on the street, accompanied by the cries of the northern region people. When the explosion stopped, the surviving northern region soldiers finally could not take it anymore. They threw away their helmets and armor and ran away. The violent explosion in the west of the city was heard by everyone in the Chu capital. Even Ren Qining, who was outside the city, heard it. His eyes turned cold as he asked, "How could it be?" Soon, someone stumbled out of the city and reported, "Your Majesty, the Mahist army has monsters. Our soldiers have suffered heavy casualties." Ren Qining was so angry that his face turned green. "I want to know what kind of monster is so powerful." The reporting soldier said with a trembling voice. The soldiers didn't even see clearly what it was. They only heard an earth-shattering boom. Then, many people died with blood all over their bodies. "You mean, you didn't even see the Mahist army?" Ren Qining asked. The soldier thought for a while and nodded. They did not see the Mahist army. "Bastard! I don't care what kind of monster the Mahist army has. Take the west gate for I in 2 hours." The soldier hesitated for a while and said, "But, many soldiers said that it was a punishment from the gods. That was why the heavenly thunder came. They did not dare to go." Ren Qining sneered and said, "Heavenly thunder? Where would the heavenly thunder come from on a clear day? If there is a heavenly thunder, it will strike I first. Send the order. If we can't take the west gate in 2 hours, we will take the head of the commander." "Yes." Seeing the soldier who sent the message leave with a face full of fear, Ren Qining's ashen face became even more twisted and ferocious. "Heavenly thunder. Ridiculous. Mo Xiaoyao, did you really get the treasure left behind by the ancestors?" Ren Qining was different from Tan Jiji. He grew up in a big family that was truly hidden from the world. The people who taught him were all old officials of the previous dynasty who had always been loyal to the previous dynasty. Naturally, he had also read many books about the previous dynasty. There were even authentic copies of the previous dynasty that did not exist in the world. Among them, there were some personal letters written by the previous dynasty's founding ancestor. There were some obscure things mentioned in them. Originally, Ren Qining did not care. After all, the founding ancestor did not use those things when he conquered the world. Later generations of emperors also did not see any powerful mysterious weapons. Whether they were real or fake was still up for debate. But at this time, thinking about the matter of the previous dynasty's treasure in the northwest, what else did Enchanting not understand? At that time, he was busy suppressing the tribes in the north that did not obey him. However, he still sent people to the northwest to pay attention to this matter. However, they did not find any treasure. The people who wanted to fight for the treasure also returned in defeat. He did not expect that Mo Xiaoyao really did secretly get it. Chapter 737. What a good Mo Xiaoyao. I want to see just how strong you are. Enchanting snorted and gritted his teeth. The battle in the city lasted from dusk to night. The capital, which should have been quiet in the past, was still brightly lit and the sounds of battle shook the sky. On the west gate, Feng Zhiyao and Enchanting were also waiting. Enchanting looked at the flames in the city and frowned. If the army doesn't arrive in time, I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on much longer. Feng Zhiyao frowned. The prince said he would arrive, so there won't be a problem. As long as the west gate doesn't fall into the hands of the northern army, everything will be resolved once the Mahist army enters the city. Although he said that, Feng Zhiyao also knew the difficulties involved. They had been blocked and attacked by the northern army along the way. It was already not easy for them to reach the capital in such a short amount of time. Moreover, the Black Cloud cavalry was several times faster than the infantry. It would be extremely difficult for the army to arrive in 2 to 4 hours. Enchanting was not someone who worried too much. He sighed and said, "You're right. No matter what, we just have to defend the west gate." Feng San. Not far away, Ling Haoyu rushed over in his bloodied clothes. However, there were more scars on his body than when he left. "When will the army arrive?" Ling Haoyu asked in annoyance as soon as they met. Feng Zhiyao rolled his eyes and reached out to support him. "They'll arrive when they can. Do you think it was easy for us to come here? That lunatic Yilu Yi mobilized almost all of the northern army in the Dechu state to stop us." Ling Haoyu panted and leaned against the city wall. "If the prince doesn't come, we really won't be able to hold on." "I know," Feng Zhiyao said. "If they delayed for another half a day, not to mention the soldiers in the city, they wouldn't be able to hold on. He might not be able to hold on here either." Although the soldiers of the northern region were afraid of the minefields that Qi Lin had placed on the streets, there were already several groups of people who had tried to force their way through. Although they were beaten back, if they were to do it again, they would have to fight in close quarters. Qi Lin had used up all the bombs he had brought with him, and he had already turned around to kill the enemy. Enchanting said, "Big brother Lang, you should rest here for a while. I'll go down." After saying that, Enchanting lifted his spear and was about to walk down the city gate tower. Ling Haoyu pulled him over and said, "Don't go. You have to guard the city gate with Feng San. I still have to go look for someone." Currently, there was fighting everywhere in the city, and it was a complete mess. Ling Huai and the others had been separated for a long time. Chu Jing was not small, so it was very difficult to find someone in this situation. But Ling Haoyu had to go. But Enchanting looked worriedly at Ling Haoyu's wounds. Ling Haoyu patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "It's just a superficial wound, it doesn't matter. I'm going." "Wait." Feng Zhiyao stopped him, and a smile of ecstasy appeared on his face. "The army is here." Everyone turned their heads to look, and sure enough, they saw a fire dragon moving quickly towards them from afar. At first, it was only faintly discernible, but after a while, it became very clear. Not to mention, there was also the sound of horse hooves gradually approaching. Feng Zhiyao shouted loudly, "The army is here, open the city gate." Immediately, there was a burst of cheers from the city gate tower. The first to arrive was still the Black Cloud cavalry. In the dark night, the black cavalry quickly rushed through the city gate and rushed into the city without stopping. Then, they clashed with the northern soldiers in the city. After a while, everyone on the city gate tower saw the white-haired Imo Xiaoyao, who was dressed in white, riding his horse. "Prince is here. Prince is here." Red fireworks bloomed in the night sky once again. Chu Jing, which was originally filled with killing and blood, was now filled with cheers and laughter. On a street in the east of the city, Wei Lin and a few soldiers were surrounded by a large group of northern soldiers. There were already piles of enemy corpses around them, but there were even more enemies standing in front of them. Fresh blood still soaked his black clothes, but it was impossible to see in the night. His cold eyes swept across the northern soldiers who were glaring at him like tigers watching their prey. Wei Lin sneered and raised the sword in his hand, drawing a cold light and a bloody light at the same time. After fighting non-stop for an entire day, even Wei Lin was a bit tired, not to mention the ordinary soldiers beside him. Very quickly, the soldiers beside Wei Lin also collapsed. Wei Lin's eyes were bloodshot as he quickly waved his sword and killed his way into the enemy. Just as these northern soldiers were rejoicing that they were finally going to get rid of this troublesome person, a group of soldiers wearing clothes completely different from those of Chu Jing and the northern army charged over. The person in the lead was tall and straight, and his appearance was handsome and solemn. The blue frost sword in his hand glittered coldly. Wherever it went, the northern soldiers who couldn't dodge in time were all killed. With the addition of this new force, the situation of the battle was instantly reversed. "Who are you?" The person at the head of the northern soldiers roared unwillingly. The person on the horse glanced at him proudly and waved his sword without hesitation. "This general is Hisu. Big brother." Wei Lin looked at the man in military uniform in surprise. Wasn't this an Yi who he hadn't seen for many years? An Yi. Hisu strode forward to support Wei Lin and smiled. "Xiao Si, I haven't seen you for so many years, how are you?" Wei Lin nodded. "We're all good, but Big Brother was sent out on a mission by the princess. He hasn't come back yet." Although they knew that an Yi was sent out on a mission by the princess, they didn't know what the mission was. In the past few years, they had been secretly worried about him, but they didn't expect that when they met again, he had already become a general leading troops to war. Hisu smiled. "The princess said that compared to others, I was more suitable to lead troops to war. So she asked me to anonymously become a soldier under General Murong's banner. Later, after moving around, I didn't disappoint the princess after so many years. Congratulations, Big Brother." They were both from the Shadow Guard and they were both brothers of the princess's Shadow Guard. Wei Lin was naturally happy for Hisu's achievements. Hisu smiled. "I also heard people say that you guys are also doing well. The prince has already led the army into the city. Your injuries aren't light. Go to the west of the city and rest for a while." Although Wei Lin was wearing black and couldn't see his injuries, Hisu wasn't an ordinary person. Naturally, he could see that Wei Lin's complexion wasn't good. He was afraid that his injuries weren't light. He called a few soldiers to escort Wei Lin to the west of the city. Hisu took his subordinates and continued to clear out the northern soldiers in the city. It wasn't until dawn that the sounds of fighting in the city gradually stopped. But there were still some small places where the fighting continued. The soldiers of the Maoist army were still shuttling through the streets and alleys to search for the remaining northern soldiers and the wounded in the Chu capital. The sky was slightly bright. Mo Xiaoyao led a group of soldiers and stood on the north wall of the Chu capital, looking down at the northern army camp in the distance. Although there were still hundreds of thousands of northern soldiers outside the city, the Maoist army didn't put them in their eyes. After this battle, not only did the northern army fail to take the Chu capital, but they also lost countless soldiers. Not to mention their military strength, just their morale had dropped by more than one level. Chapter 738. After the bloody battle just now, even the heavens seemed to show some compassion. The sky had just brightened when fine snow began to fall from the sky. Mo Xiaoyao did not wear a cloak. He was still dressed in white as he stood on the city gate tower amidst the fine snow. Looking up from below, he looked like a god overlooking the mortal world. Even from such a distance, Ren Qining and the generals of the northern region still felt an indescribable pressure. "Prince, we found Duke Hua." A guard hurried over to report. Mo Xiaoyao turned around and asked, "Where is he?" The guard hesitated and said, "Duke Hua is in the south of the city. He's heavily injured." "I'm afraid." Everyone's heart sank. They naturally understood what the guard meant by, "I'm afraid." Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment before saying, "I'll go take a look." "General Liu, I'll leave this to you." Liu Songxian did not say much and nodded silently. Duke Hua was in a small alley in the south of the city. When the Mahist army soldiers found him, he was already heavily injured and could not move. Not far from him were the corpses of Northern and Chu state soldiers. Duke Hua had been stabbed by a sword. The sword had not been pulled out yet. He sat alone on a stone block not far from the alley entrance to rest. The winter nights in the Chu capital were not much warmer than the northwest. Duke Hua was already nearing 80 years old. With such heavy injuries, his face was already a bit pale. "Old Duke." Mo Xiaoyao stepped forward and supported Duke Hua. He glanced at the military doctor in front of him and asked, "What's wrong? Why aren't you treating Duke Hua?" Duke Hua raised his hand to stop Mo Xiaoyao. He shook his head and said, "No need. I know my own injuries. I can't take it anymore." Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head to check the sword wound. His expression also darkened. Duke Hua's injury was at a vital point. If he was in his prime, there might be some hope. However, in Duke Hua's current state, he would probably die the moment he pulled out the sword. Mo Xiaoyao closed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Old Duke, we are late." Duke Hua shook his head and glanced at Mo Xiaoyao. "I know it's not easy for you either. To be able to arrive in time and prevent Chu capital from falling into the hands of the Northerners." "Very good." Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyebrows and pondered for a moment. Then, he placed one hand on Duke Hua's shoulder and channeled true qi into him to prolong his life. At the same time, he ordered, "Go find the people from the Hua clan." The guard at the side hurriedly reported, "They've already gone. If the Hua clan's people are all right, they should be here soon." Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Duke Hua smiled and asked softly, "How are Tian Xiang and the others?" Mo Xiaoyao replied in a low voice, "They're doing very well. Tian Xiang has already arranged for Qingfeng to get married in a few months." "Qingfeng, come here." Su Qingfeng hurriedly came forward and said respectfully, "Old Duke." Duke Hua raised his head with some difficulty and smiled. "The children of the Su family are all good children." "Very good, this old man won't be able to see you get married. From now on, treat Tian Xiang well." Su Qingfeng's eyes reddened as he nodded, "Yes, old Duke." "Grandfather." "Good child." The sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the alley and a young man hurriedly ran over. "Grandfather. Grandfather." Duke Hua raised his head and looked at him. A trace of relief flashed in his eyes before he slowly closed them. "Grandfather." When the young man arrived, he just happened to see Duke Hua smiling with his eyes closed. He couldn't help but kneel in front of him and cry loudly. To the side, a trace of sadness flashed in Mo Xiaoyao's eyes as he slowly withdrew the hand he had placed on Duke Hua's shoulder. He ordered in a low voice, "Duke Hua sacrificed himself for the country and died in battle. passed down the order to be buried with the rights of a marquis and be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty. This subordinate obeys. The same sad scene played out in many places in the capital. In this battle, the number of people who died was uncountable. Not only were there the Chu capital garrison, but there were also the Black Cloud cavalry and the Mahist army. Not only were there ordinary soldiers, but there were also many high-ranking generals. In another place, Leng Haoyu struggled to support his seriously injured body as he looked at the person lying on the ground in front of him. There was a complicated look in his eyes that no one could understand. Ling Huai knelt on the ground, holding his eldest son's cold body in his arms. When they found Leng Qingyu, he was already dead. An arrow had hit his chest, hitting his vital point. This man, who had always been cold, proud, and unwilling to admit that his concubine's younger brother was better than him, finally died quietly on the streets of Chu capital without leaving a word. Ling Huai hugged his son's cold body as tears streamed down his face. No matter what, this was the son he doted on the most and had placed the most hopes on. The pain of losing his son was more painful than letting him die. Leng Haoyu stepped forward silently and squatted beside Ling Huai. He whispered, "Father, take big brother back first." In the end, the equally proud Leng Haoyu was finally willing to admit that this man was his elder brother. Ling Huai looked back at Leng Haoyu and his gaze fell on the wound on his chest. He asked, "How's your injury?" Leng Haoyu said, "It's just a superficial wound." "Father, let's go back." Ling Huai nodded. He carried Leng Qingyu with some difficulty and walked in the direction of the Leng residence with Leng Haoyu. Chapter 739. In the capital of Chu, the newly arrived Mahist army replaced the exhausted defenders of Dechu State on the city gate tower. Looking at the black flag on the city gate tower and the soldiers in black standing upright in the cold wind, the army of the northern region had to give up temporarily and did not dare to act rashly. Mo Xiuyao led the crowd into the imperial palace of Dechu State. A trace of melancholy involuntarily flashed across Mo Xiuyao's cold eyes as he looked at the majestic yet somewhat desolate imperial city in the thin layer of snow. However, there was more of an indescribable complexity in his eyes. As soon as he walked into the imperial palace, Missouri Xiaoyun came out with Princess Xining to welcome him. When he saw Mo Xiuyao, he also went forward and bowed respectfully. Xiaoyun pays his respects to Uncle Prince Ding. Mo Xiuyao glanced at Mo Xiaoyun indifferently. He naturally didn't have a good impression of Mo Jingqi and noble consort Lu's son. However, Mo Xiaoyun in front of him was a little inferior to Mo Jingqi. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the two people in front of him, asking, "Where is Great Elder Princess?" Mo Xiaoyun lowered his head and said, "Great Elder Princess passed away 2 days ago. But she was worried that it would affect the morale of the soldiers guarding the city, so she asked us to keep it a secret. Great Elder Princess's coffin is still in the Imperial Palace, and Zhaoyang Elder Princess is still keeping vigil." Mo Xiuyao nodded and went to pay respects to Great Elder Princess first. Great Elder Princess was 2 years older than Duke Hua, and she didn't suffer too much illness before she died, so she could be said to have died of old age. After paying respects to Great Elder Princess in the palace where her coffin was temporarily placed, Mo Xiuyao greeted Zhaoyang Princess. Zhaoyang Princess was dressed in plain clothes and didn't wear any makeup. Her face was full of unconcealable fatigue and haggard. The two sat down in the side hall. Zhaoyang Princess looked at Mo Xiuyao and said with relief, "Originally, I thought that you couldn't make it and the Chu capital would really fall into the hands of the northern region. Fortunately." Mo Xiuyao calmly told him about the battle in the city, including Duke Hua's death. When Zhaoyang Princess heard this, her eyes turned red. She sighed and had nothing to say. After a moment of silence, Zhaoyang Princess asked, "What do you plan to do with the two children?" Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and looked at Zhaoyang Princess. Zhaoyang Princess sighed and said, I didn't like those two children at first. What good can a woman surnamed Liu and a child raised by the Liu family be? However, after spending some time with them, she realized that these two children were very different from their parents. If possible, give them a way out. Murong Shen and the southern marquis, who was guarding Feihong Pass, attacked from both sides, forcing the northern tribe's army to retreat. In addition, the northern tribe's army was short on food and could not withstand months of hard fighting. Both sides had to call a truce. The northern tribe's army had not achieved anything after months of hard fighting. There were also some internal conflicts. Helplessly, Ren Qining could only give the order to retreat from Zijing Pass and return with hatred. Thus, it was spring in March. Although much of Dechu State's territory was still in the hands of the northern tribes and the northern tribes. However, in a short 7 to 8 months, the Mahist army was invincible from east to west, and then from west to east. This was enough to prove that this famous army was still strong. Thus, the Mahist army's territory stretched from Shiling's Onping continent to the west, to Dechu State's Zijing Pass to the east. Although the territory was slightly smaller than Shiling's, it was still much larger than Dechu State's imperial court in Jiangnan. More importantly, Prince Ding's family owned the two imperial cities in the east and west. Their reputation was second to none in the world. After more than half a year of fighting, both sides had used up countless amounts of money and food. For the time being, no one had the energy to continue fighting. Thus, even though the various armies were still eyeing each other covetously, they all had the will to stop and recuperate. Once the fighting stopped, Mo Xiaoyao threw the large and small matters of the Chu capital to Feng Zhiyao, LV Songxian and the others. Then, he quickly rode back to the northwest. The Mahist army knew that the Wang Fei was pregnant. They understood the prince's anxiety and did not say anything. Li. In the middle of April, although spring came later in the northwest, it was already late spring. In the garden of the Prince Ding mansion, all kinds of beautiful flowers were still blooming. Among them, the most beautiful ones were the peonies that had been transplanted from Yunzhou. All kinds of peonies competed to be the most beautiful, making the entire garden appear elegant and luxurious. Their fragrance filled the air. Yili sat on a stone stool covered with thick cushions in the garden. She smiled as she watched Mo Xiaobao wield a small sword and focus on swinging it. Ling Junhan and Su Jirue, who were watching from the side, also cheered. Even though Yili suspected that the two little ones didn't know what was good and bad. Under the light green cloak, his round belly was already very big. Yili smiled as she watched the sword dance and gently caressed the round belly. Even though it was already 9 months, the belly was too big. Mo Xiaobao had not been this big in the beginning. Thinking of how Dr. Lin had mentioned that this could be twins, Yili smiled faintly. There was nothing wrong with twins, but she had not told Mo Xiaoyao about this. Otherwise, with his personality, it was possible that he would abandon the soldiers on the battlefield and run back. Chapter 740. Hearing the sound coming from outside the garden, Yili was slightly startled. She couldn't help but think, could it be that she was hearing things in the late stages of pregnancy? Mo Xiaobao, who was dancing with the sword, heard this and blinked. He turned to face Yili and pursed his lips. Nyangqin, Fu Wang has returned. Although her tone sounded like she was unhappy, her pair of big black eyes suddenly lit up. Yili turned her head and saw a certain person covered in dust standing at the entrance of the garden looking at her with a smile. Li, I've returned. Xiaoyao, seeing that she was about to stand up, Mo Xiaoyao quickly jumped into the garden and supported Yili, saying, Don't move, you. Looking at the round belly in front of him, the usually calm Prince Ding couldn't help but widen his eyes and look worriedly at Yili. Li, are you all right? Why is he so big? Dr. Lin said that he might be twins, so naturally he's much bigger than one. Yili said with a faint smile. What? Mo Xiaoyao felt his vision darken and his limbs go soft. One was enough to make him worried and afraid, but there were two. How could it be like this? Where is Shenyang? Have him quickly come over and take a look at Wang Fei. Mo Xiaoyao said anxiously. Yili glanced at him in annoyance and said, Don't you know that Sir Shen went to Fourth Brother's place? Dr. Lin has already taken a look at me. I'm fine and the child is also fine. But, no buts. Yili said firmly. She pulled Mo Xiaoyao and said, Why don't you wash up and rest after coming back? I came out for a walk and will go back soon. Go back and rest first. Mo Xiaoyao was already scared out of his wits and could only allow Yili to pull him away. The three children behind him looked at each other. After a long while, Su Jirue blinked and asked with a handsome face as serious as his father's, We didn't pay our respects to uncle. The youngest child, Ling Junhan, touched her head and said, Uncle Prince Ding won't be angry if he doesn't see us. Uncle Prince Ding didn't even spare them a glance, but, thinking of Uncle Prince Ding's cold eyes, little dummy Leng shook her little head. If he didn't see it, then so be it. It's good that he didn't see it. Mo Xiaobao proudly stared at his father's back as he walked away. He snorted and raised his little head. I don't care if he sees me. Let's go find eldest uncle. The three little buns gathered together for a discussion and agreed that Mo Xiaobao's suggestion was not bad. Eldest uncle was much more amiable than father. After returning to the main courtyard where the two lived, Mo Xiaoyao came out after bathing and freshening up. Yili had already ordered people to prepare some of Mo Xiaoyao's favorite dishes and put them on the table. These days, Mo Xiaoyao was in a hurry to return to the northwest and didn't eat much. Seeing these dishes, he couldn't help but have an appetite. He sat down and pulled Yili to eat together. Now wasn't the time to eat and Yili didn't feel hungry. She only ate half a bowl of porridge and then stopped. She sat on the side and watched Mo Xiaoyao eat. From time to time, she would pick up some meat for him. After so many years, Mo Xiaoyao was still a picky eater. If it wasn't for Yili personally picking up food for him, he would only eat vegetarian dishes. He was even more sage-like than Su Qingqin. As they ate, Mo Xiaoyao talked about some things that happened in the Chu capital. Naturally, he didn't forget about Du Qua dying for the country. Yili had a good impression of Du Qua and was naturally very sad to hear about his death. I'm afraid that I will have to tell Sister Hua and Tian Xiang about this. Mo Xiaoyao said, You don't need to worry about this. I will have someone tell them. You, the children are more important. Wait until these two are born. Yili thought for a moment and could only nod, the children will be born next month. When the children are 1 month old, it will be grandfather's birthday. With a frown, Yili gently stroked her round belly and said, If that's the case, then we won't hold the children's 1 month old celebration. It wasn't a small matter to hold Prince Ding's young master and young Juanju's 1 month old celebration. If it was held together with grandfather's birthday, then they wouldn't have to do anything in the next 2 months. Mo Xiaoyao didn't have any thoughts on whether to hold the children's 1 month old celebration. He only raised an eyebrow and asked, back then, Mo Xiaobao's 1 month old celebration was a big one. Won't these two be unhappy when they grow up? Yili smiled and said, Prince Ding is concerned about the relationship between siblings. What can a 1 month old celebration be? If he is unhappy because of this, then it's because we, as parents, didn't teach them well. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and smiled as he looked at Yili's belly. It's not that Father King is biased towards you, it's your mother's idea. Is Li here? Su Qingshan's elegant voice came from outside the door. The servant girl guarding the door quickly bowed and said, "Prince Ding just returned. Wang Fei is accompanying Prince Ding to eat." Hearing their voices, Mo Xiaoyao instantly became unhappy. He had just returned and hadn't even gotten a chance to rest. Why did Su Qingshan come to find him? Couldn't he just let him rest? Yili didn't sense Mo Xiaoyao's unhappiness. She laughed and said, "Dagu, come in." Su Qingshan stepped into the parlor and looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was staring at her with a dark expression. A hint of a smile appeared on her lips. "When did Prince Ding come back?" "We didn't even know," Yili said apologetically. "He just arrived and went straight back to Yuan." "Does Dagu have anything to do at this time?" Su Qingshan asked. "If it was in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if the prince didn't care about the Prince Ding mansion in the northwest. But now, the Prince Ding mansion covers thousands of miles from east to west. Why did the prince?" This question indeed puzzled many people. Not only the subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion, but even outsiders could not see through Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts. If it were anyone else who had such a vast territory, they would have long since claimed to be the overlord. Unlike Mo Xiaoyao, who did not have any self-awareness in this regard. Mo Xiaoyao held Yili's hand and smiled amiably at Su Qingshan. "No other reason." "Not interested." "Not interested." Su Qingshan frowned and couldn't help but roll his eyes in his mind. Young Master Qingshan was naturally calm and easy to accept. If it were anyone else, such as Feng Zhiyao and the others, they would probably pounce on Mo Xiaoyao and shake him by the collar. "Are you playing with us? Are you playing with us?" Su Qingshan was only surprised for a moment before regaining his composure. All right, it wasn't like he was going to be the emperor. If he wasn't interested, then so be it. Actually, ascending the throne was just a ceremony and a title. In the Prince Ding mansion, who dared to say that Mo Xiaoyao's authority was not as great as the empress? To hell with the legitimacy. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Su Qingshan with some disdain. "Since young Master Qingshan is fine, you should go back first. I am a bit tired and want to rest for a while." The husband and wife were reuniting after a long separation. What was he doing here? Su Qingshan acted as if he didn't see his gaze and smiled at Yili. "Since it's like this, Li, you should rest well. I will take good care of Xiao Bao and the others." Hearing this, Yili's face was filled with dejection. She actually left the 3 children in the garden and left. Was her mind really muddled because of pregnancy? "Big brother, are Xiao Bao and the others with you?" "Sorry to trouble you." "It's no trouble. It's just that Xiao Bao told me sadly that his father didn't even want to look at him and left." Su Qingshan's smile was like a spring breeze. Mo Xiaoyao laughed coldly and said lightly, "Then I'll have to trouble young Master Qingshan to take care of them. After all, Mo Xiaoyao likes eldest uncle the most, right?" Speaking of favorite, Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but grit his teeth. He deeply felt that he had raised a little white-eyed wolf who lived off him while helping others. Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao was really going to carry the children away, Su Qingshan didn't tease him anymore. She smiled and bid farewell. In the reception pavilion, Yili looked curiously at Mo Xiaoyao. She wanted to say something, but stopped. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her with a smile. "Why is Li looking at me like that? Have you discovered that your husband has become more handsome after not seeing him for so long?" Yili looked at the sky, speechless. "You really don't plan to ascend the throne?" Mo Xiaoyao gave a light snort and said carelessly, "What's so good about ascending the throne? I'm always worried that someone will steal my throne. Occasionally, when I want to play around, I'll be scolded by the imperial censors. When I want to kill someone, I'll have to listen to the long-winded lectures of those old men. Most importantly, I have no interest in accepting the daughters of those old men who can't marry. Could it be that Lily wants your husband to have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards? Actually, it's not impossible. After your husband ascends the throne, I'll order that the future emperor can only have 1 empress and no concubines. Then, I'll kill all those old men who like to criticize me. Your husband will be a tyrant. What do you think, Lily? Yili only felt a wave of powerlessness. She waved her hand and said, "Let's talk about ascending the throne later." Chapter 742. In less than a month, the news of the Mahist army occupying the Chu capital had spread throughout the great rivers North and South Pass. In an instant, all the nobles who had been scheming against each other had calmed down. In a short span of less than 10 years, Prince Ding's residence had actually changed from being suppressed by Mo Jingqi to a behemoth that could compete with anyone under their eyes. Many people regretted that they didn't take advantage of the Prince Ding mansion's weakest moment to stab them a few times. Now, they had an unpredictable and powerful enemy. However, looking at the Mahist army soldiers guarding the city like wolves and tigers, the people who were ready to make a move couldn't help but retract their steps. It was true that the desire to destroy the Mahist army was strong, but everyone knew that the hunter would shoot the bird that sticks out. If they couldn't help but make a move and fight to the death with the Prince Ding mansion, it would only benefit others. While the people in power of each country had their own thoughts and plans, the Prince Ding mansion in Glass City was in chaos. The usually quiet and warm main courtyard was in a clamor. There were a few people sitting or standing in the parlor, all of them looking restless. There were also many people standing in the courtyard outside the parlor, waiting anxiously. If one had been in the Prince Ding mansion for a long time, they would definitely remember that this scene had played out once 7 years ago. That's right, today was the day that the Prince Ding mansion's new member was going to be born. In the parlor, Mo Xiuyao sat on the main seat with a calm expression. However, if one looked carefully, they would find that his body was already stiff. If it wasn't for him trying his best to control himself, he might have already rushed into the room. Although he had already experienced it a few years ago when he gave birth to Mo Xiaobao, it was because he had experienced it that he felt even more terrified. Furthermore, when she gave birth to Mo Xiaobao, there was only one. This time, there were 2. Everyone in the parlor had the same goal of distancing themselves from Mo Xiuyao. Even the mischievous Mo Xiuyao, who usually made his father uncomfortable, tactfully distanced himself from Mo Xiuyao and lay in Mr. Qingyun's arms. Yili wasn't someone who liked to scream when she was in pain, so when she was giving birth, it didn't sound as scary as the average pregnant woman. Qin Zheng, who was sitting by the side, could not help but recall the time when she gave birth to Su Jirue. It was said that the entire Su manor could hear the screams. Su Qingze, who had always been cold and stern, was so scared that he fainted the moment he heard that the child was born. Compared to Yi Li's current situation, she suddenly felt that she had lost too much face. Mo Xiaobao stared at the maidservants carrying water in and out from time to time. He leaned into Master Qingyun's arms worriedly and his dark eyes were filled with fear. Master Qingyun patted his little great-grandson tenderly and said softly, "Qin-er, don't be afraid. Your mother is fine. Qin-er, do you want to go out and play with Jirue? When you come back, brother and sister will come out." Mo Xiaobao shook his head and said, "No, Qin-er wants to wait for brother and sister to be born." Great-grandfather, was it very painful when mother gave birth to Qin-er? Master Qingyun smiled and said, "Yes, every mother will be very painful when giving birth to a child. So Qin-er must be filial to mother in the future. Do you understand?" Mo Xiaobao nodded heavily and said, "Qin knows. Qin-er will be filial to mother. Qin-er likes mother the most. Good boy." There were also many people standing in the courtyard outside the door. Not only the people of the Prince Ding mansion, but also Hua Tianxiang, Han Mingxi, Yi Wenhua, and others. The parlor was too small to have a place to sit. They had to wait anxiously in the courtyard closest to it. In the bedroom, Yili was lying on the bed and enduring the waves of pain. Her face was a little pale. Second Madame Su anxiously watched the midwife busying herself. She could only hold Yili's hand and said, "Li her, don't be afraid. If it hurts, just cry out." Yili squeezed out a smile at Second Madame Su. This birth was indeed more painful than the last time when she gave birth to Mo Xiaobao. There was a sharp pain, and Yili finally couldn't help but cry out in pain. Second Madame Su wiped the sweat on her forehead and asked, "What's the matter? How long will it take to give birth?" The midwife was a little embarrassed and said, "I'm afraid it will take a while. The position of the little heir's fetus is a little wrong. We have to adjust the position of the fetus." Second Madame Su's face darkened. She had also given birth to 2 children, so she naturally knew the trouble of having a wrong fetus. "Then hurry up. You know the identity of the princess consort. Don't let anything happen to her." The midwife nodded and said, "Madam, don't worry. The princess consort's condition isn't serious. There won't be any problems. It's just that the princess consort will have to suffer a little." Yili also heard their conversation. She nodded slightly and said, "It's okay. You can do it." The midwife then went forward and adjusted the position of the fetus. Second Madame Su held Yili's hand and comforted her in a low voice, "Don't be afraid, Li. Relax. When Aunt gave birth to your 3rd brother, the position of the fetus was also wrong. Don't worry." Yili nodded and endured the waves of pain. From day to night, other than Yili's painful cries, there was no sound of the child crying. Mo Xiuyao, who had been sitting on the main seat, finally couldn't take it anymore. He stood up and was about to walk in when Master Qing Yun hurriedly called out, "Stop." Chapter 743. Mo Xiaobao pulled Second Furen's clothes and couldn't wait. Grand Aunt, Chen wants to see his brother and sister." Everyone couldn't help but laugh. When Second Furen turned around to give the child to Mo Xiuyao, there was no sign of Mo Xiuyao. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief when the child was born safely. After waiting here for a day and night, they were all very tired. Especially Master Qing Yun, who was 80 years old and couldn't bear the fatigue. Seeing Yili and the child were safe, Su Hongyu hurriedly ordered Qin Jing and Su Qingze to help Master Qing Yun back to rest. Everyone else also dispersed to rest. Only Second Furen still needed to spend some effort to look after the 2 children with the midwife. Yili woke up from a deep sleep. There were candles in the room and it was already dark outside. She habitually raised her hand to touch her belly and found that the round belly that had accompanied her for several months was flat. Her entire body was sore as if someone had taken it apart. She moved her body and out of the corner of her eye, she saw a head of silver hair spread out by the bed. She saw Mo Xiuyao lying on the bed, holding one of her hands and sleeping soundly. When Yili moved, Mo Xiuyao quickly opened his eyes. Seeing Yili open her eyes and look at him, his sleepy eyes suddenly bloomed with joy. "Li, you're awake." Yili nodded and raised her hand to smooth his messy hair. She asked softly, "How long have I slept? Where are the children?" Mo Xiuyao looked outside and said, "It's already 5 o'clock. You've slept for almost a day and a night. The children." A trace of confusion flashed through Mo Xiuyao's eyes. He hadn't seen the children yet. "Someone come." Qing Shuang and the others who had been waiting outside heard the sound and quickly came in. Princess is awake." Seeing Yili wake up, Qing Shuang was also very happy. This servant will have someone bring the hot porridge prepared for Wang Fei. Mo Xiuyao stopped her and asked, "Where is the child?" Qing Shuang smiled and said, "Young master and young Canton princess are sleeping outside. This servant will ask Mama to bring them in." After speaking, Qing Shuang bowed and hurriedly turned around to leave. Not long after, Mother Lin and Mother Wei each came in with a swaddle in their arms. She carefully placed the swaddling clothes on the empty space on the bed beside Yili. She smiled and said, "Princess consort, quickly take a look. The little heir and the little princess are very good looking." Yili looked down. Although she already knew what a newborn baby looked like, she still couldn't help but feel embarrassed. With her eyesight, she really couldn't tell what was good about these two wrinkled and red little monkeys. But in the end, they were her children. Looking at the two little things sleeping comfortably with their eyes closed, Yili felt her heart soften like cotton. Lovingly touching the little babies' red faces, Yili couldn't help but smile. Mother Lin said, "Princess consort, the one in red is the little princess, and the one in yellow is the little heir. The little princess looks exactly the same as Princess consort when she was young." Yili's mouth twitched. In any case, she couldn't tell how the little bun looked like her. She smiled and looked at Mo Xiuyao, asking, "Xiuyao, take a look." Mo Xiuyao originally didn't have much interest in the two little buns. Hearing Mother Lin's words, he looked over. After looking for a long time, he looked at Yili's face and nodded. They really do look alike. I's little princess will definitely be as beautiful as Princess Li in the future. So, this person didn't actually see it, but it was a beautiful wish. Yili had already slept for a day and a night. When she woke up, she was a little hungry. After eating a bowl of meat porridge that Qing Shuang had carefully prepared, Mo Xiuyao was finally sent to rest. Mo Xiuyao hadn't had a good rest since Yili started acting up and was about to give birth 2 days ago. Now that he saw with his own eyes that Yili was safe and sound, he finally let out a sigh of relief. After Yili finished her porridge, she got up and went to rest. Yili, on the other hand, had slept for too long, so she couldn't fall asleep. She placed the two little buns, whose eyes hadn't even opened, on her bed to look at them. Looking at the two babies who were still sleeping soundly with their eyes closed, Yili's heart was filled with tender feelings. She bent down and kissed the two wrinkled little faces. When the sun had just risen, Mo Xiaobao, who had received the news that Yili had woken up, ran over. He didn't let anyone report his arrival and ran into the bedroom. Yili raised her head and saw him poking his little head into the room. She couldn't help but smile and ask, "What are you looking at? Why aren't you coming in? Is Father Wang not here?" Mo Xiaobao looked around the room, as if confirming that Mo Xiuyao really wasn't here. Only then did he walk in with relief. He ran in small steps to Yili and looked at the two babies lying side by side on the bed. "Mother, are you all right?" Yili lightly smiled and rubbed her son's little head. She smiled and said, "Mother is fine, so I came to see little sister and little brother." Mo Xiaobao climbed onto the bed and knelt on the bed to look at the two little buns. He stretched out his little hand and curiously poked at them, asking, "Little sister and little brother, why do they look like wrinkled little monkeys? They don't look good at all." Yili quickly grabbed his mischievous little hand and said with a smile, "After a few days, they will become white and chubby babies." Xiaobao also looked like this when he was just born. What? Mo Xiaobao was puzzled, but there was also a little disdain and disbelief. How could he be so wrinkled and ugly? Chapter 744. Of all the people who heard the news, the angriest were Mo Jingli and Ren Qining. Needless to say, Mo Jingli and Mo Xiuyao were naturally at odds. Now that their children were a couple, they were deeply in love. But he couldn't even find his only son. How could Imo Xiuyao not be angry? In his anger, he couldn't help but remember his deep hatred for Imo Jingqi. He tormented the 7 or 8-year-old little emperor. The originally timid and weak little emperor was so scared that he cried and almost fell sick. Compared to Imo Jingli, Ren Qining was even more furious. His son, daughter, wife, and concubines were all killed by Imo Xiuyao. This kind of killing was no different from exterminating his entire family. Just like that, he had even stirred up a conflict between factions in the northern region that was not harmonious to begin with. How could Ren Qining not hate Imo Xiuyao to the core? Seeing the red invitation aimed at the golden auspicious cloud, Ren Qining was so angry that he almost spat out blood. Imo Xiuyao! Imo Xiuyao! In the study, seeing Ren Qining's ferocious expression, his trusted aides were so scared that they didn't dare to speak. After a long time, seeing Ren Qining slowly calm down, someone came forward and asked carefully, "Young master, this invitation, are we going?" Ren Qining smiled coldly, holding the invitation tightly in his hand, as if he was holding Imo Xiuyao himself. "Go, why wouldn't we go? Not only I, the northern tribes, southern Zhao, and western Tomb are all going. If we don't go, won't people look down on us?" The advisor was shocked and asked worriedly, could it be that Imo Xiuyao is holding a banquet at Hongmen this time? Ren Qining glanced at his subordinate and snorted, "Banquet at Hongmen, no matter how capable Imo Xiuyao is, he doesn't have the ability to trap so many people in Glass City and kill them. I just want to probe the thoughts of the rulers of each country. It just so happens that I also want to meet Yelu Yi and Lei Jinting." Hearing his words, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Soon, someone else raised a question. If young master were to go personally, I'm afraid he would have to bring along a madam. But now, it was indeed inappropriate for the ruler of a country to go on a diplomatic mission without his female companions. What's more, there were some occasions where women played an irreplaceable role. Especially in the Prince Ding mansion, when there was a Princess Ding who held real power, the distinguished guests from various countries who attended the birthday banquet would inevitably bring their women along. However, the problem now was that all the women of the northern region's royal family had been killed. Not a single one of them was left. And now, the thing that gave Ren Qining a headache was also the harem. Previously, Ren Qining had married the princess of the northern region tribe as his first wife, and then he had taken in several concubines. Waving his hand to interrupt the discussion, Ren Qining said in a low voice, "Go back and announce Ai's decision. Confer Helan of the Taji tribe as the empress." "Young master!" Everyone shouted in unison. One of them stepped forward and said, "Young master, that Princess Helan is unruly and willful. How can she be the empress?" Ren Qining said impatiently, "Otherwise, can you find a more suitable candidate from the northern region? Being unruly and willful also has its benefits. At least she isn't so scheming, so as to avoid annoying people." His ex-wife, the princess of the northern region, was no less scheming than a man. The northern region didn't have as many restrictions on women as the Central Plains. The princess of the northern region was originally cultivated as an heir. Unfortunately, she fell in love with Ren Qining at first sight and was willing to be a queen in the harem rather than the leader of the most powerful tribe in the northern region. Even so, Ren Qining had long been impatient with the many restrictions placed on her. If Imo Xiuyao hadn't been so ruthless, Ren Qining probably would have thanked him properly this time. In addition, confer the titles of Lord Wang's eldest daughter and Lord Zhang's third daughter as concubines. With this, everyone was satisfied. When it came to palace politics, how could a woman of the northern region who only knew how to make a scene be a match for a woman of the Central Plains? Chapter 745. Northwest Glass City. 6 or 7 years ago, it was just an inconspicuous city in the northwest of Dechu State. However, because Prince Ding's residence was located here, it had developed into a place that connected the various countries in the western region to the Central Plains in just a few years. At the same time, it had also become one of the most prosperous cities in the surrounding countries. And now, it was connected to the westernmost Xiling Imperial City and the Chu capital Chongqing City in the east. At this point, the east-west trade route that Prince Ding's residence had painstakingly managed for several years was finally declared complete. Glass City was destined to become a transfer point between the two sides. It was more prosperous than the west. It was only the middle of the 6th month, but there were even more people coming to Glass City. Not only were there rich merchants, noble families, and refined scholars, but there were also people in power and royalty from various countries. Suddenly, Glass City could be said to be a gathering of heroes. Originally, even though Master Qingyun was famous, if it was just his birthday, there wouldn't be so many people coming. However, when Master Qingyun was Princess Ding's grandfather and the Su family members all held important positions in the Prince Ding mansion, everything changed. Moreover, there were also the two major events of Prince Ding's recent acquisition of 2 capital cities and the birth of a son. Basically, anyone who could make it in time wouldn't miss out on this grand occasion. In the Prince Ding mansion in the city, Master Qingyun and Su Zhou were sitting under a shady tree and playing chess. No matter how noisy it was outside, it wouldn't reach them. As he thought about the game in front of him, Su Zhou smiled and said, "Glass City can be said to be a gathering of heroes. Master Qingyun is so lucky." Master Qingyun shook his head indifferently. What's the point of a birthday celebration? It's not as good as a family eating a meal together. How many people in this city are sincerely here to celebrate an old man's birthday? Su Zhou thought. Although Master Qingyun's words were straightforward, they were the truth. He smiled faintly and said, "In any case, it's the children and grandchildren's filial piety. Mr. Qingyun, please don't attack them like this." Mr. Qingyun smiled and said, "How could this old man be so insensible? Although we old men are old and weak, we can still watch a few plays." Hearing this, Su Zhou also smiled and shook his head. He slowly placed a chess piece on the table and smiled. "Now that you've said it like that, you're making those people who rushed here in a hurry feel embarrassed. Greetings, Mr. Qingyun." At the door, a servant in green said respectfully. Mr. Qingyun raised his head and asked, "What's the matter?" The manservant respectfully reported, "Fourth young Master Su has returned and is waiting outside to pay his respects to Mr. There is also a Mr. Shooting who wishes to see you." Su Zhe and Mr. Qingyun looked at each other. Mr. Qingyun hurriedly said, "Quickly invite Mr. Shooting and Qingbai in." The manservant accepted the order and left. Su Zhe smiled and said, "Chen Xiufu is also here. I heard that he helped fourth young master in Xiling. It seems that he is now sincerely loyal to the Prince Ding mansion." Mr. Qingyun smiled and said, "With his sincere help, Qingbai will be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort." As they spoke, Mr. Shooting and Su Qingbai walked in one after another. Su Qingbai walked in front of Mr. Qingyun and respectfully knelt down. "Grandson greets grandfather. I haven't been able to serve grandfather for a long time. Please forgive me." Mr. Qingyun hurriedly pulled him up and looked him up and down. He nodded and smiled, "Good child. You look energetic. Seems like you're doing well in Xiling." Su Qingbai smiled and said, "Thanks to Mr. Shooting's help, grandson is not in a hurry." Beside him, Mr. Shooting also hurriedly came forward and bowed. Junior Chen Xiufu greets Mr. Qingyun and Elder Su. Mr. Shooting had seen Su Zhe when he was traveling in the Chu capital. Even though he hadn't seen him for many years, he could still roughly remember his appearance. Mr. Qingyun smiled and said, "Shooting, you don't have to be so courteous. It's rare for you to come to Glass City. If there's any neglect, please don't blame me. Mr. Shooting hurriedly said that he didn't dare. Suja invited Mr. Shooting to sit down and have a long talk. The three of them were rare scholars in this world. Naturally, they were very congenial when they talked. Su Qingbai saw that they were chatting happily and got up to leave to see Su Hongyu. At this time, the Prince Ding Mansion's large study was also very busy. Even Yili, who was usually not allowed to do this and that, was dragged to the study to do things. There were less than 10 days until Mr. Qingyun's birthday. Many of the guests who came to attend the birthday banquet had already arrived. This banquet could be said to be unprecedentedly grand. In less than a month, the population of Glass City had increased by more than 30%. Other than the guests invited by the Prince Ding Mansion, there were also merchants from various countries who came because they heard the news. There were also many scholars and tourists who came on their own to participate in this grand occasion. Needless to say, all the inns in Glass City were filled with people. There were even many people who came late who couldn't find a place to stay. With so many people suddenly appearing, there were naturally countless problems with basic necessities, food, housing, transportation, security, and so on. There was also the balance between the nobles of various countries, the relationship between these people and the Prince Ding Mansion. What kind of agreements could be reached between the two sides and what benefits could be obtained from each side had to be carefully considered. It was no wonder that they were so busy. When Su Qingbai came in, he saw his father, his two elder brothers, Mo Xiuyao and Yilit sitting around a large long table. There were all kinds of thick booklets piled in front of each of them. Needless to say, there were even more booklets piled up in front of Zhuo Jing and the others who were doing preliminary review and classification. When he thought about how he was so busy these few months in West Hill that he didn't even have time to eat, he couldn't help but feel happy. It seemed that he wasn't the only one who was tired in West Hill. His father and elder brothers who stayed in Glass City weren't far behind. Prince, father, eldest brother, second brother, Li, I'm back. Su Qingbai said with a smile. Seeing him come in, Mo Xiuyao, who was originally sitting beside Yili, suddenly had a gleam in his eyes. Su Qingbai only felt a chill down his spine. Mo Xiuyao smiled warmly and said, Qingbai, you're back. It must have been a tiring journey. Come in and take a seat. Su Qingbai couldn't help but feel flattered by Mo Xiuyao's courteous reception. He looked at Mo Xiuyao warily and said with a faint smile, Prince, you're too kind. It's all right. In this way, Mo Xiuyao smiled even more happily. Since you're not tired, come, these are all yours. Mo Xiuyao casually raised his hand and slapped Su Qingbai into the chair beside him. It didn't hurt, but he couldn't stand up either. Mo Xiuyao unceremoniously moved all the booklets in front of Yili to Su Qingbai. He smiled amiably and said, I'll have to trouble you with these. Li, the doctor said that you can't use your eyes too much since you just gave birth. Let Qingbai take care of these. Su Qingbai stared blankly at the pile of booklets in front of him. When he met his eldest brother's teasing gaze, he then understood that he was obviously the coolie who had sent himself to their doorstep. How's fourth brother in West Hill? In the end, it was still Su Qingze who was kinder and asked Su Qingbai. He didn't feel that his family had become so inhumane after he left for less than a year. Su Qingbai raised his hand and flipped through the booklets in front of him as he answered, It's all right. It's almost on the right track. Chapter 746. Yili looked helplessly at the empty table in front of her. She turned around and took a book from Mo Xiuyao. She smiled and said, Fourth brother, you're too humble. The West Hill has been much calmer these few months. It's clear that you've managed it well. Su Qingbai shook his head and smiled. How can you say that I've managed it well? There was quite a bit of trouble last month. This time, General Zhang could only stay behind to guard the place. When grandfather's birthday comes, I'll have to rush back as soon as possible. Su Hongyu said calmly, managing a place isn't something that can be achieved in a short period of time. There's no need to be impatient. Su Qingbai nodded. Thank you for your advice, father. I understand. He was indeed impatient. He was too young. He had become a governor before the age of 25. Naturally, there were too many people below him who didn't like him. However, he also understood that it was just as his father had said. Managing a place would take at least 3 to 5 years. When he thought of this, his originally impatient mood gradually calmed down. With one more person, it would naturally be faster to get things done. In less than 2 hours, the documents on the table were all dealt with. Actually, these things didn't need so many people to do it. Usually, Mo Xiuyao, Su Qingchen, or Su Hongyu would be able to do it. However, during this period of time, they didn't believe it. Each of them had many things to do and didn't have much time to look at these reports. After dealing with the things on hand, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. In these 2 days, the rulers of various countries who liked to put on airs should be arriving. If they didn't deal with them now, they would have to wait until after the birthday banquet. However, it wouldn't be good to delay many important matters for the birthday banquet. After dealing with the matters, they asked for refreshments to be served. Only then did the family have time to sit down and chat for a while. Second brother, our first aunt, Mr. Shen, and Weo back. Yili frowned and asked as she ate the supplements prepared for her. Last year, when Shenyang went to the West Hill, he had also brought Weo along. After all, he was officially learning medicine from Shenyang. Naturally, he couldn't stay in a small place like Glass City. No matter how talented he was, he wouldn't improve much if he just read books. Su Qingbai's hand that was holding the tea paused slightly. They're all back. His mother was a little tired from the journey, so she went back to her residence to rest. Mr. Shen seemed to have some new ideas that he wanted to discuss with Dr. Lin, so he left with Wuyo. Hearing this, Yili raised her eyebrows and looked sideways at Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and elegantly. Su Qingbai, on the other hand, seemed a little uncomfortable and changed the topic. Why don't I see second uncle? Su Qingchen said, second uncle has gone to the northern tribes, but he should be coming back with the northern tribes envoy this time. Su Qingbai was far away in West Hill and did not know much about what was going on in Glass City. He gave him a curious look. Su Qingchen then briefly explained the matters of the Moon Glass City. After listening, Su Qingbai could not help but sigh. Actually, he was far away in the Western Tomb and could already be considered stable. In that case, after fighting for a year, we should be able to settle down for a while, right? Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, who knows? But other than the confrontation with the northern tribes, the Mahist army should be able to settle down for a while. What plans does the prince have? In this year, the Mahist army had displayed their strength to the surrounding powers with a near-total victory. In the short term, no one would have the guts to provoke the Mahist army. However, they had to guard against the possibility of all these people ganging up against the Mahist army. Mo Xiuyao leaned against the back of the chair and said lazily, rest and build up strength. I am not in a hurry. As long as they don't want to fight, they can rest first. At the same time, the Mahist army's strength is still a little lacking compared to the northern tribes and West Hill. It's a good chance to raise an army. Anyway, he did not want to be the emperor and was not in a hurry to fight for territory. He also did not have to worry about fighting for the throne. But as long as he swallowed the territory, no one would be able to make him spit it out. Therefore, compared to the rulers of the surrounding countries, Mo Xiuyao was the most relaxed and comfortable. The king of the northern tribes was already old. The brothers Yelu Yi and Yelu Hong had been fighting openly and covertly for more than 10 years. No one knew what the outcome would be. Ren Qining of the northern region seemed to have a monopoly on power, but the conflict between the people of the northern region and the people of the central plains would erupt sooner or later. Enchanting of West Hill and the Emperor of Xiling had almost openly fallen out with each other. Enchanting, who originally had the upper hand, was greatly weakened after Mo Xiuyao's bloodbath. He was on the same level as the Emperor of Xiling. In the end, who would win would depend on whose methods were better. As for Mo Jingli, who lived in Jiangnan, and Princess Anqi of Nanzhao, Mo Xiuyao did not take them seriously for the time being. What if they still want to fight? Su Qingchen asked. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows. If they want to fight, then fight. Do you think I will be afraid of them? Hearing this, Su Qingchen could not help but smile. Of course, if they wanted to fight, who would the Mahist army be afraid of? Reporting to the prince's consort, the king of the northern region has arrived. Qin Feng came in and reported from outside the door. Mo Xiuyao was somewhat surprised. Whether it was the distance or the friendship between the two families, Ren Qining should not have been the first to arrive. Originally, even he thought that the first to arrive would be either Enchanting or the Emperor of Xiling. After a moment of surprise, Mo Xiuyao pulled Yili to stand up and said with a smile, whether or not he is legitimate, he is still the ruler of a country. Li, come with me to welcome him personally. Since they had come in the name of a birthday celebration, these people naturally had to come to the Prince Ding mansion to greet Master Qingyun. As the masters of the Prince Ding mansion, Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao did not come out to greet them. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiuyao with a faint smile and said, I'll go with Big Brother. Are you sure the king of the northern region won't draw his sword and cut you down? After killing his entire family, it was too much to ask for someone to greet him with a smile. Yi Li could imagine what expression Mo Xiuyao would have if he personally went to greet Ren Qining. Mo Xiuyao did not mind and smiled, why would he? Since he's here, it means that he can definitely endure it. Also, do you think I will be afraid of him if he draws his sword? Although it's not good to kill the king of the northern region, if he attacked first, I won't have any qualms about it. Yi Li could not win against him in an argument, so she could only be dragged to greet Ren Qining. That's right, he was very excited. Even the people around them could clearly feel that Prince Ding was very enthusiastic about greeting the king of the northern region. At the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion, 2 rows of guards dressed in black stood in an orderly manner. They looked solemn as they guarded the entrance of the mansion. At the same time, they also turned a blind eye to the annoying scene in front of them, as if they did not see anything. Ren Qining, who had just arrived, was wearing the unique royal clothing of the northern region. His expression was twisted as he stared at the white-clothed, white-haired, and smiling handsome man standing at the entrance. Although he looked like a typical person from the Central Plains, Ren Qining did not look strange at all when he wore the clothing of the northern region's nomads. Instead, he looked more boorish and heroic than when he wore the clothing of the Central Plains. Chapter 747. However, this heroic aura disappeared the moment he saw Mo Xiuyao's face. Instead, it became twisted and ferocious. No matter how ambitious a person was and how willing he was to sacrifice everything for the world, he would not have as much self-control as he thought he would have in front of the murderer of his wife and child. Especially when the murderer was smiling happily at him. Mo Xiuyao did not care what Ren Qining thought. In fact, the more unhappy Ren Qining was, the happier he was. Thus, when he saw Ren Qining's expression, he only raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion, Northern Region King, what's wrong? I haven't seen you for 1 or 2 years and your temperament has changed a lot. Is there something wrong with my Prince Ding mansion? Enchanting gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, Prince Ding, you must be joking. I am just a bit tired from the journey. I see. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, I was not thoughtful enough. Since that's the case, why don't Northern Region King rest at the inn first? Shall I hold a welcoming dinner for the Duke of Beijing tonight? No need. I will greet Mr. Qingyun first as a courtesy, Enchanting said. Northern Region King, don't worry. Grandfather will understand. Understand what? Do the people of the northern region not know etiquette? Prince Ding, is this the famous Princess Ding? Seeing Enchanting's expression become uglier and uglier, a beautiful woman beside Enchanting asked. Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have only just noticed the two women beside Enchanting. They were both quite beautiful. One of the women in blue looked delicate and gentle. She was clearly a woman from the Central Plains. The beautiful woman who spoke didn't have the usual jade-white complexion of the Central Plains women. Instead, she had a healthy wheat complexion. Although she was beautiful and had an arrogant aura, she did not look arrogant. Yili took a step forward and said with a smile, I don't deserve to be called famous, but I am Yili, may I know who this is? Enchanting said, this is Ai's queen, Helan. This is imperial concubine Yun. Yili smiled in her heart. Enchanting's action was quite fast. In just a few months, he had made up for all the wives and concubines. But he didn't forget to bring his concubines when he went out with his wife. The conflict between the natives of the northern region and the people of the Central Plains must have been very serious. Without looking at the woman in blue, Yili smiled at the gorgeous Queen Helan and said, the Queen's presence in Glass City brings light to the Prince Ding mansion. Northern Region King, Princess Consort, please come in. Queen Helan looked at Yili and said with a smile, although I don't understand what you're saying, I know you're praising me. Princess Ding, I like you very much. Yili couldn't help but smile and say, thank you, Queen, for your kindness. Please come in. Queen Helan was not polite. She walked up to Yili and wanted to take Yili's hand. Mo Xiaoyao, who was standing to the side, frowned slightly and raised his hand to block Helan's hand. Queen Helan rolled her eyes and raised her hand to hit Mo Xiaoyao. A slender hand reached out and grabbed her wrist. Yili looked at her with a smile and said, Queen Helan, our prince has never liked to fight with women. Let this consort play with you. Queen Helan's eyes lit up and she said with a smile, okay. Breaking free from Yili's grip on her wrist, Helan pulled out a colorful whip and said to Yili with a smile, I heard that the princess of the Prince Ding mansion is very good when I was in the northern region, and I wanted to fight with you. I'm going to start now. After saying that, she raised her arm and waved the whip at Yili. Yili smiled faintly. Her figure moved nimbly, and she pulled out a long sword from Qin Feng's hand. With a wave of sword light, the two people fought. Helan. Queen Helan's sudden appearance was obviously out of Enchanting's expectation. Her face darkened and she shouted in a deep voice. Mo Xiaoyao didn't care. He looked calmly at the two people who were fighting and said with a smile, Northern Region King, you don't have to care. It's just a casual fight. Li has always had a sense of propriety. She won't hurt Queen Helan. Mo Xiaoyao's words were definitely not mocking Enchanting. Everyone present could see that although Queen Helan's martial arts were good, she was still far inferior to Yili, who had fought on the battlefield. Enchanting said with a gloomy face, the queen is rude. Thank you, Prince Ding, for not blaming her. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and turned his gaze to the two graceful figures at the door. The woman in blue standing next to Enchanting was the concubine that Enchanting had taken with Helan when he was forced to marry her. She was the daughter of Enchanting's confidant, so she was naturally more favored than Queen Helan, who was born in a noble family in the northern region. But today, at the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion, whether it was Prince Ding or Princess Ding, they both ignored her. This made Imperial concubine Yun, who was originally a little arrogant because of the favor, feel a little embarrassed. At this time, seeing that the Prince Ding mansion and Queen Helan had taken away everyone's attention, she was even more displeased. She couldn't help but whisper, "Didn't you say that Princess Ding was born in a scholarly family? Why didn't you invite the guests in and instead fight with them at the door?" She thought that she was speaking softly, but everyone present was an expert with profound skills. Mo Xiaoyao's gaze swept past her indifferently, and a faint coldness flashed in his eyes. Yili and Queen Helan, who were fighting, also separated at the moment she finished speaking and returned to their original positions. Yili said with a smile, "Queen Helan's skills are extraordinary. Why don't we have a spar when you have time?" Queen Helan said with a smile, "Okay, Princess Ding, you're really amazing. I admire you, and I'll make friends with you." Yili said with a smile, "It's Yili's honor to have the Queen as a friend. Northern Region King, Queen Helan, please come in." Ren Qining looked deeply at Yili and said with a faint smile, "Thank you, Princess. I haven't seen you for a long time, but you look as good as before." Yili smiled elegantly, "Northern Region King is too kind." Chapter 748. After inviting Ren Qining and the others into the mansion, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili personally accompanied them to see Mr. Qing Yun. Ren Qining and the others walked in the Prince Ding mansion and couldn't help but show a trace of surprise when they saw the scenery of the mansion's courtyards. Although the Prince Ding mansion was located in the center of Glass City, it was also the largest mansion in Glass City. But compared to the palaces of the other countries, it was naturally not enough. Even compared to the Prince Ding mansion in the Chu capital, it was still a bit smaller. Needless to say, the mansion didn't have the richly ornamented rafters and painted rafters or exotic flowers that outsiders imagined. The front courtyard where government affairs were usually handled was clean and simple, but it didn't lose its grandeur. The courtyard where people lived in daily life was also quiet and peaceful. This kind of mansion wasn't bad, but compared to Mo Xiaoyao's current reputation, it was a bit shabby. Ren Qining looked at the white-haired man walking in front of her, her gaze deep. This kind of behavior, if it wasn't that he really didn't want to rule the world, then he had a bigger plan. Very quickly, Ren Qining threw the first possibility to the back of her mind. If he didn't have the idea of ruling the world, then what was Mo Xiaoyao fighting wars for? Mr. Qing Yun's temporary residence was a small and quiet courtyard in the depths of the mansion. In reality, although the Prince Ding mansion wasn't big, it had all kinds of rules and regulations. Usually, many officials and generals that came and went to the front courtyard or the main courtyard where Mo Xiaoyao and Yili lived. Normally, they wouldn't disturb other people. So the entire back half of the mansion was very quiet. Standing at the door, she asked the servant outside to go in and report. Yili then turned to look at the blue-clothed woman beside Ren Qining and said, "Imperial concubine Yun, please stay for now. Go to the side hall to have tea." Imperial concubine Yun was startled and looked at Yili with some dissatisfaction, saying, "This concubine came sincerely to celebrate Mr. Qing Yun's birthday. What does princess mean?" Yili frowned slightly and looked at Ren Qining. "Northern Region King, our Central Plains has never brought a concubine to celebrate a birthday. Northern Region King, please forgive us." Once she said this, Ren Qining's expression became a bit ugly. He was from the Central Plains and was born in the most orthodox royal family of the Central Plains. Even if the Lin royal family no longer existed, he didn't miss anything that he should learn. Yili's actions were clearly mocking him for his lack of etiquette. "Your Majesty." Ren Qining's face didn't give her face. She glared hatefully and then reached out to tug on Ren Qining's sleeve with tears in her eyes. Beside her, Queen Helan gave a hearty laugh and said, Ding Wangfei must have misunderstood. Not to mention your central plains, even our north doesn't have this rule. It's just that your majesty likes imperial concubine Yun and has her serve you. Just have imperial concubine Yun wait outside for us to come out. The northern region indeed didn't have such a rule. The nobles of the northern region were all led by the first wife. In the eyes of the nobles of the northern region, the concubines were no different from female slaves. Basically, the nobles of the northern region would never become someone's concubine. Yili smiled, so it's like that. As they spoke, the servant who went in to report came out and invited everyone in. Imperial concubine Yun quickly pulled on Ren Qining and looked at him pitifully. Your Majesty. Ren Qining frowned slightly and said, wait outside. Junior Lin Yuan greets Mr. Qin Yun. In the small courtyard, Mr. Qin Yun was originally brewing tea. After hearing the servant's report, he let people invite Yili and the others in. Without waiting for Yili and Imo Xiuyao to go forward and introduce them, Ren Qining stepped forward and bowed slightly. Mr. Qin Yun stopped and raised his head to look at Ren Qining. He said with confusion, Lin Yuan. Although this old man is old, I still remember that the king of the northern region is surnamed Ren. Ren Qining smiled faintly and said, Lin Yuan is Ren Qining. Junior Lin Yuan greets Mr. Qin Yun. At the side, Mo Xiuyao's expression was slightly cold. No wonder Ren Qining was the first to come and greet Mr. Qin Yun. Rather than saying it was to celebrate, it was better to say it was to annoy people. Back then, the head of the Su family killed the last emperor of the previous dynasty and surrendered. After that, the Su family was used by the successive emperors of Chu and had the reputation of being the head of the Confucians. Ren Qining's actions were clearly to remind Mr. Qin Yun that the Su family's current position was obtained by betraying the previous dynasty's imperial family. Mr. Qin Yun looked Ren Qining up and down for a while before saying with a smile, so there is still a branch of the previous dynasty's imperial family. Not bad. For the northern region king to have such achievements, you should be able to comfort your ancestors. Ren Qining looked at Mr. Qin Yun and asked in a low voice, I wish to restore the mountains and rivers and revive the imperial family. Does Mr. Qin Yun think it is possible? Yes. Mr. Qin Yun said, there is nothing in the world that cannot be done. Why can't Mr. Lin have this ambition? Ren Qining's eyes flashed and he asked again, does Mr. Qin Yun think I will succeed? Mr. Qin Yun was silent for a while before asking, if the king of the northern Jin really unifies the world, will the surname be Ren or Lin? Will the world be called the northern region or the great Qin? Hearing this, Ren Qining's expression changed slightly. He forced a smile and said, it won't be too late to talk about it after the mountains and rivers are stabilized. Mr. Qin Yun shook his head and said, if the king of the northern Jin can't make a decision, there will never be a day when he unifies the world. Ren Qining's face was slightly pale, but he remained silent and didn't say anything. Yili walked up to him and smiled. Grandpa, why are you making tea alone? Are Elder Su and Mr. Shooting not here? Mr. Qin Yun smiled and poured a few cups of tea for them to sit down. He smiled and said, they are playing chess in the study. I am old and can't bear to be bored, so I came out to drink a cup of tea. But where did you Chin and the other boys go these days? I didn't find someone to call them. Why didn't they come to see me, this old man? Yili covered her mouth and smiled, these days grandfather just let them rest. They are lying in the courtyard looking at their younger brother and sister. The two babies who were already more than a month old had now grown up. They were pink and tender and were very cute. The three little buns led by Mo Xiaobao circled around the two babies every day when they had nothing to do. They didn't even like to play around on weekdays. How could they come to the small courtyard to listen to Mr. Qin Yun's tutoring? Grandfather is also bored in the manor. Li let people send the boys to accompany grandfather to relieve boredom. Grandfather, don't think they are naughty. Mr. Qin Yun waved his hand and said, forget it. Those few are more and more troublesome this year. It's not easy to be free for 2 days. 7 or 8 years old boys were at the age when cats and dogs disliked them. Mo Xiaobao, this kind of naturally intelligent little rascal, was even more difficult to deal with. He took the younger ones to play around in the Wangfu. Everyone was afraid of him. If it wasn't for Su Qingchen before, now there was Yili to suppress him. He was afraid that he would play around outside the Prince Ding mansion. But now for the 2 children who were just born not long ago, it was very rare to be quiet for a long time. Every time she saw Mo Xiaobao lying beside the cradle and talking to the babies who didn't understand anything, Yili felt that Mo Xiaobao would definitely be a good brother. Accompanying Mr. Qin Yun to talk for a while, Yili and Mo Xiaoyao accompanied Ren Qining out. Don't know which sentence of Mr. Qin Yun touched Ren Qining. When he went out, his face was still a little pale. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili just acted like they didn't see it. They ordered people to send Ren Qining and others back to the post house to rest. Chapter 749. Actually, Mo Xiaoyao was thinking too much. The baby didn't look like Su Qingchen, but like Yili's mother, the late Madame Su. Madame Su was one of the most beautiful women in the Su family, and was also Su Qingchen's aunt. Upon closer inspection, she looked a bit like Su Qingchen. Little Bao Bao looked like Madame Su, so she looked a bit like Su Qingchen as well. Not yet, Grandpa said to think about it carefully. We can give her a nickname first. Actually, it wasn't too late to give a baby a name before 1 year old. However, it was inconvenient to always call a baby without a name, especially now that there were 2 of them. Mo Xiaoyao also felt that they should think about it carefully, especially his little princess. He originally wanted to name her himself, but after a long list of names was rejected by him, Master Prince Ding began to doubt his own knowledge for the first time in his life. He couldn't even think of a nice name for his baby. Then let's give her a nickname first. What should we call her? Mo Xiaoyao looked sideways at the little boy in Yili's arms who was giggling foolishly while holding on to Yili's fingertips. He smiled wickedly. Then let's call her after little treasure Mo, let's call her Mo Xiaobei. Yili could imagine the resentful look in her baby's eyes when he grew up. She rolled her eyes at him and said, are you talking about a daughter? Little treasure Mo was good enough, it could barely be a boy's name. If she really called him Xiaobei, her son would cry himself to death in the future. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. How can that do? I've already thought of a nickname for the little princess. Let's call her Little Axan my and Li's sweetheart. We're all here now, aren't we? Are you sure it sounds better than Xiaobei? Should she thank him for not calling her sweetheart? Little Axan is very nice. How about Li? Mo Xiaobei, Little Axan Yili looked up at the sky speechlessly. Seeing how happy Mo Xiaoyao was as he carried the little princess, her heart softened. Be careful then, but there's no Mo Xiaobei. My little brother's nickname is Lin She had to stick to her bottom line. She didn't want her son to feel inferior because of a nickname. Mo Xiaoyao looked unwillingly at Lin who had almost called him Mo Xiaobei, but when he saw Yili's determined expression, he could only give up. Be careful, Axan my darling. Father likes you the most. Yili helplessly looked at the man who had suddenly become childish. Was it really okay to favor women over men? Many years later, the famous second young master of the Mo family would confess to the person he trusted the most that the person he loved, respected, and appreciated the most in his life was his mother. It wasn't because she gave birth to him, nor was it because she loved and raised him. It was because she had resolutely saved his name, so that he wouldn't fall into the same tragic situation as his older brother. She was quite prestigious among the officials of the northern region. It was precisely because of this that the originally harmonious relationship between husband and wife gradually changed. And now, this one seemed to be unrestrained and unscrupulous. But who was Mo Xiaoyao? If he wanted to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger, no one in the world was better than him. Who does Enchanting think he is? After using the people of the northern region, he wants to throw them away. I'm afraid that in the future, he won't be able to get rid of them and will instead suffer the consequences of his own actions. Yili couldn't help but smile. In that case, it seems that my feeling is not wrong. Was Queen Helan trying to be friendly with us just now? Mo Xiaoyao said, Li, don't worry too much. If you like her, there's no harm in making friends with her. If you don't like her, don't pay attention to her. If you want to deal with Enchanting, I have plenty of ways. Yili smiled and said, it doesn't matter. I also think that this Queen Helan is very interesting. Why don't we invite her to the prince's mansion in 2 days to have a cup of tea and chat? Mo Xiaoyao didn't oppose Yili's proposal. Li, do as you see fit. Yili lowered her head and teased the baby with a smile. Enchanting was too complacent. She didn't know what kind of expression he would have when he was stabbed by the people around him one day. Enchanting smiled and said, I was just congratulating Prince Ding for having just taken over Changxing City and having a son. It's a double blessing. Hearing this, Mo Jingli's expression instantly darkened. Enchanting was talking about Changxing City right now. It was no different from slapping him in the face. Wasn't Chu Jing abandoned by him? Raising his eyes to look at Enchanting, Mo Jingli squeezed out a cold smile. It's not just your knees. Didn't you just take over the Emperor of Xiling City last year? Is Genom of Gojosian heir and his family well? Chu Jing had fallen into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, but hadn't the Emperor of Xiling City also fallen into Mo Xiaoyao's hands? Not only that, Enchanting's trusted grandson and granddaughter had all been killed by Mo Xiaoyao. It was hard to tell who was uglier in comparison. Hearing this, Enchanting couldn't laugh anymore. Although the Emperor of Xiling City wasn't lost in his hands, it was because he didn't have time to send reinforcements. Standing on the steps, Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. Choosing this time to treat them was really asking for trouble. Now, all the surrounding countries didn't seem to be friends with the Prince Ding mansion, especially these two in front of her. Was it really okay to stand at the entrance and discuss the lost city? Or were they hoping that Mo Xiaoyao would spit out what he had taken? Smiling faintly, Yili said softly, Prince Ding Mansion and Prince Ding Mansion have come from afar and must be tired from the journey. Why don't we have a cup of tea before catching up? Hearing this, the two looked at each other with disgust. Who wanted to catch up? Besides, they didn't have anything to talk about. Leading the group into the mansion, Yili waited for the servant to serve tea before saying with a smile, Grandfather is old and has been tired recently. I'm afraid he won't be able to see you too. Please don't blame him. Both of them knew that Master Qing Yun was already 80 years old. Yili's reason naturally couldn't be found wrong. Enchanting nodded and said, We're here to celebrate Master Qing Yun's birthday. How can we trouble him? It's better if we wait until the day of the birthday banquet to celebrate Master Qing Yun's birthday. Yili smiled and thanked him. The atmosphere in the hall became a bit strange. The three men present clearly weren't friends with each other. Naturally, they didn't have anything to say. Yili also didn't have a good impression of Enchanting and Mo Jingli. Thus, she wasn't in the mood to adjust the atmosphere. Tilting her head, she smiled at Emo Xiaoyao and said, I have something to say to fourth sister. I'll have to trouble Prince to entertain Genom of Gojoseon and Prince Li. Emo Xiaoyao nodded indifferently. Yi Li then stood up and said to Yi Ying, who was sitting next to Emo Jingli, with a faint smile, Fourth sister, let's go out for a walk. Yi Ying clearly had something to say to Yi Li. She didn't say anything and stood up to follow Yi Li. Once the two left, only Princess Xixia was left in the hall. Princess Xixia looked at the door and stood up, I'll also go out for a walk. Soon, only the three men were left in the large hall. The atmosphere became even more solemn. After a while, Emo Jingli laughed coldly and said, Emo Xiaoyao, you've got some tricks up your sleeve. Last year, everyone in the world was fooled by you, right? Lei Jinting looked at Emo Xiaoyao with a gloomy expression. It could be said that in the past year, no one had truly gained an advantage over the other countries. The one who had truly benefited was the white-haired man who was lazily leaning on the chair. The Prince Ding mansion didn't just gain a large piece of land and 2 capitals in Xiling and Dechu state. More importantly, this time, the Mahist army had truly and completely gotten rid of the burden and shackles of Dechu state. Right now, no matter where the Mo family army wanted to attack, it was perfectly justifiable, and no one could say anything about it. Therefore, from the beginning, Mo Xiaoyao had been waiting for the northern tribes in Xiling to attack Dechu state. Because as a former subject of Dechu state, even if they had broken off relations with Dechu state, they definitely couldn't attack Dechu state first. Now, this restriction had been completely broken. Although a long time had passed and anyone could understand the mystery, it was too late now. But it was too late to think about it now. Mo Xiaoyao had already taken advantage of the 1 year's time. Even someone as arrogant as Lei Jinting couldn't help but sigh at Mo Xiaoyao's patience and scheming. Mo Xiaoyao looked lazily at Mo Jingli, his lips curling into a mocking smile. I am magnanimous. I don't mind the loser shouting a few words. Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Jingli roared angrily. Facing Mo Xiaoyao, he seemed to always be the loser. But Mo Jingli had never had such a strong hope that Mo Xiaoyao had never existed in this world. Because of his scheming, he had lost half of Dechu state, lost Dechu state's capital, and could only live in a corner. Even in Jiangnan, he held great power and his words were absolute. But every time he heard someone talking about Mo Xiaoyao, he seemed to hear the ridicule and dissatisfaction in their hearts. Because the capital he had lost was saved by Prince Ding. And the capital that was saved was no longer Dechu state's. All of this was because of Mo Xiaoyao. Chapter 751. Mo Xiaoyao lazily raised his eyes. I am not here to listen to you rant. If there's nothing else, then go back to the post house and take it with you. Genom of Gojoseon, do you have anything else to say? If not, then I will take my leave. Mo Jingli's face was ashen, and his tightly clenched fists made cracking noises. Lei Jinting, on the other hand, was a little more composed. He calmly smiled and said, Prince Ding, why are you in such a hurry? Mo Xiaoyao smiled complacently and said, I want to go back and see my little princess. The news that Princess Ding had given birth to a pair of twins was naturally known to everyone. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's expression, it was clear that he doted on his daughter more. This made Lei Jinting somewhat curious. After all, to most people, sons were more important. Mo Xiaoyao only had 2 sons at the moment, which wasn't a lot. In contrast to Lei Jinting's calm and collected manner, Mo Jingli's face was somewhat unable to conceal his jealousy. To Mo Jingli, Mo Xiaoyao's high-profile flaunting was simply rubbing salt on his wound. I wonder if I would have the honor of meeting the Prince Ding mansion's little princess? Lei Jinting asked. Mo Xiuyao naturally wouldn't agree. My daughter has just turned 1 month old, and can't be exposed to the wind. I'm afraid that Genom of Gojoseon will be disappointed. Lei Jinting wasn't surprised by this. His relationship with Mo Xiuyao naturally wasn't good enough for him to feel at ease getting close to the Prince Ding Mansion's newborn child. He didn't mind Mo Xiuyao's rejection, and only smiled faintly. That's a pity. Mo Xiuyao waved his hand and said faintly, Genom of Gojoseon, if you have something to say, feel free to say it. Lei Jinting lowered his eyes and smiled faintly. Prince Ding sure is straightforward. Fine, Prince Ding invited all the dignitaries of the various countries at this time, so he naturally knows what's going on. I wonder if Prince Ding has the time to speak with I alone. Mo Xiuyao's sword-like eyebrows raised. Of course, I have no problem. There are a lot of things going on these days. How about we wait until after grandfather's birthday celebration? Lei Jinting nodded with satisfaction and said, in that case, I'll be waiting for Prince Ding. In the garden in the rear courtyard of the mansion, Yi was to take a stroll. She glanced sideways at Yi Ying, who was one step behind her, and couldn't help but recall the Yi Ying before her wedding. At that time, Yi Ying was still a young girl of 14 years old. Her appearance and talent were the best in the capital, and it was the time when countless girls were envious of men. Now, 10 years had passed, and the Yi Ying in front of her was only a thin and pale figure. Even though her appearance was still as beautiful as before, she no longer had the brilliance and elegance of the past. She was like a soulless wooden beauty. Pulling Yi Ying to sit down in the pavilion, Yi Li asked softly, how is fourth sister now? Yi Ying raised her head and looked at her, her eyes flashing with countless complicated and indescribable emotions. Finally, she calmed down and smiled bitterly. How could third sister not know about the Li Palace? It's just passing the days, but third sister must have been living very well these past few years. Yi Ying looked at Yi Li in front of her, and her heart was incomparably bitter. The Yi Li that she had looked down on in the past had long become an existence that she could never hope to reach. Back then, in the minister's manor, her brilliance was covered by others, and she only left the world with an ordinary and unremarkable impression. However, even if a pearl was covered in dust, it would still bloom with dazzling brilliance one day. From the beginning, Yi Li was different from them. Yi Li smiled faintly. I am indeed not bad. Now, father and grandmother are also in Li City. If you have time, why don't you go and see them? Yi Ying was slightly startled and shook her head. Forget it, I don't have the ability to give the Yi family any wealth or glory. I think grandmother and father wouldn't want to see me. From the moment the Yi family chose to seek refuge with Yi Li, who had a cold relationship with them, instead of going to Jiangnan to find her, Yi Ying already understood. Father and grandmother actually didn't think highly of her. However, this decision was also correct. If the Yi family really went to Jiangnan, they would have no power in their hands, and could even be banished to the cold palace. How would she be able to settle the Yi family? At that time, Mo Jingli would probably vent his anger on them. On the other hand, no matter how cold Yi Li's relationship with the Yi family was, she could at least give them a stable place to settle down. Yi Li looked at the thin woman in front of her, deep in thought. Fourth sister has really changed a lot. How can she not change? Yi Ying sighed softly. Ever since she found out that the son that she had doted on and raised for several years was not her biological son, Yi Ying finally understood what kind of person Mo Jingli was. The affectionate love of the past and the solemn vows of undying love were already a thing of the past. Yi Ying was always faced with Mo Jingli's cold and annoyed gaze and Princess Xixia's smug smile. Although Yi Ying was both talented and beautiful, she was not someone with much political insight. In fact, because of Madame Wang's short-sightedness, she could not even compare to some of the well-bred young ladies from prestigious families in the way she handled matters. However, even so, after so many years, Yi Ying more or less understood no matter how unwilling she was to admit it. Back then, Mo Jingli gave up Yili to marry her, but it was not because he only had feelings for her as she thought back then. However, this consort still has to remind Miss Shi Xia that Prince Li's official consort has already been taken. Even if Prince Li marries, she will at most be an equal consort. In the Central Plains, there is no such thing as having two heads of state. Even an equal consort will have to lower her head in front of an official consort. Princess Shi Xia glared hatefully at Yi Li, then snorted softly and turned to leave. Chapter 753. A few days later, Princess Anxi arrived at Glass City with her husband. The messenger sent by the Emperor of Xiling arrived at about the same time as her. Although the Emperor of Xiling did not come personally, he still sent another messenger when Genom of Gojoseon was already here. Even outsiders could clearly see how tense the relationship between the Emperor of Xiling and Genom of Gojoseon was. It was unknown whether the person who arranged for these distinguished guests did it on purpose or carelessly, but they actually arranged for the messenger of the Emperor of Xiling and Genom of Gojoseon to stay in the same courtyard. After all, they were both from West Hill. As for what would happen between the two groups of people living together, it was none of the Prince Ding Mansion's business. Among all the distinguished guests, the northern tribes were the last to arrive. However, the messenger sent by the northern tribes was also quite influential. The king of the northern tribes was old and naturally could not come. This time, the messengers sent were the crown prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Hong, and the seventh prince of the northern tribes, Yelu Yi. In an instant, it could be said that the most powerful people in the world had gathered in Glass City. The last time such a grand event had happened was during Imo Xiaobao's 1-month-old celebration. Yi Li was a little surprised to see Princess Anxi again. This was because Princess Anxi was already 5 months pregnant. In the Prince Ding mansion, Yi Li saw that Princess Anxi was wearing a white queen's costume. Her usually flat belly was slightly bulging. She hurriedly asked Qing Shuang to help Princess Anxi to sit down. "Why are you here when you are pregnant? Isn't your husband worried?" Princess Anxi smiled brightly. "Us Nanzhao women are not as delicate as you Central Plains women. It's only 4 or 5 months. Even if it's 7 or 8 months, we can still walk around." Seeing that Princess Anxi's complexion was ruddy and did not look tired or pale at all after a long journey, Yi Li was relieved. After taking a closer look at her, she smiled and said, "It seems that the princess, the queen's relationship with the royal husband is not bad." Princess Anxi lowered her eyebrows and smiled faintly. Her smile became gentler when she mentioned Wang Fu Pu. She said with a faint smile, "He's an honest man and doesn't beat around the bush like you people from the Central Plains. Isn't it my good fortune to have such a royal husband?" Yi Li smiled in relief. Princess Anxi's love for Su Qingchen was destined to be unrequited. It would be great if she could find her own happiness. The two of them sat down. Qing Shuang tactfully served Princess Anxi a glass of fruit juice suitable for pregnant women before leaving. Yi Li looked at Princess Anxi and smiled, "Speaking of which, why did you come with the emissary of the Emperor Xiling?" Yi Li wasn't the only one who was curious. The others were probably wondering the same thing. Although it wasn't impossible to go from Nanzhao to Glass City through West Hill, it was much more difficult than going through Shattered Snow Pass. It was strange that Princess Anxi, who was pregnant, would go through West Hill on purpose and travel with the emissary of West Hill. Princess Anxi didn't hide it and said with a smile, "Before coming to Glass City, we went to the city of the Emperor Xiling." They were all smart people and naturally understood. Yi Li looked up at her and said with a smile, "You plan to work with the Emperor Xiling?" Princess Anxi sighed helplessly and said, "It's better to work with the Emperor Xiling than with Lei Jinting. Lei Jinting is now stuck in the middle of the Dechu state. There's the Mahist army in the north and the Yunnan River in the south. If he wants to break through the current stalemate, he either has to cross the natural barrier and fight with Mo Jingli, or he has to deal with Nanzhao. Nanzhao is small and can't compare to Westhill's strong army. We can't let him attack Nanzhao first, so we can only work with the Emperor Shiling. I only hope that the Emperor Shiling isn't an idiot. Yili said with a smile, the Emperor Shiling is weaker than Lei Jinting. But he's really an idiot. But Lei Tingfeng is still guarding in city. Can he let you work together smoothly? Princess Anxi said with a smile, Lei Tingfeng is indeed troublesome, but he's also been a little troublesome recently. Yili raised her eyebrows curiously. Lei Tingfeng was suppressed by his father's reputation and didn't seem to be conspicuous. He didn't seem to have any military achievements, but that was because his opponent was Mo Xiuyao. The information provided by the spies in the Prince Ding mansion was enough to prove that Lei Tingfeng wasn't a simple mediocre person. Princess Anxi said with a smile, don't you remember? The Yanwang Chamber and Jinan Palace have a grudge. It's just that Jinan Palace has been too powerful these years. No matter how powerful the Yanwang Chamber is, it's still a Jianghu organization. Naturally, it can't do anything about it. Now that the Emperor Shiling has just moved to An City, Jinan Palace's power has been greatly weakened. Lei Tingfeng's life in An City isn't easy either. I see. Yili nodded and said with a smile, I don't know what kind of grudge Ling Taihan has with Lei Jinting. It doesn't seem to be a deep grudge. If it really was a blood feud, with the strength of Ling Taihan and the Yanwang Chamber, it was very likely that they would rush up to Lei Jinting and fight to the death with Lei Jinting. However, Ling Taihan didn't make any moves, and he didn't really attack Lei Jinting even after several encounters. It shouldn't be an unresolvable blood feud. Princess Anxi stroked her slightly protruding belly and said with a smile, I heard about this from the Emperor Shiling. It seems to have something to do with the deceased consort Genin of Gojoseon. Consort Genin of Gojoseon passed away not long after giving birth to Lei Tingfeng. It said that her death was a bit strange. The Emperor Shiling didn't say the specifics, so who knows? Yili frowned slightly and thought for a bit, if you really plan to work with the Emperor Shiling, it's best to investigate this matter thoroughly. Although I'm Tower Master Ling, this is a very important matter. It'll be very troublesome if someone stabs you in the back at a critical moment. Princess Anxi's face warmed, and she nodded with a smile, I know, thank you for reminding me. They all knew that there was no permanent peace and friendship between countries. Perhaps they might turn against each other in the future, but at least now Princess Anxi knew that Yili truly cared about her. Let's not talk about these annoying things, Yili said with a smile. Princess Xixia came to Glass City with Mo Jingli. Do you want to see her? Princess Anxi frowned slightly and shook her head. Forget it, she doesn't treat me as her older sister, so I'll treat her as if I don't have a younger sister. For so many years, she followed Mo Jingli without any status. For Mo Jingli, she revealed so many secrets of Nanzhao. What happens to her in the future will depend on her luck. But I haven't seen your little heir and little Canton princess yet. Yili smiled, what's so difficult about that? She turned and asked Qing Shuang to bring the two little buns over. She also asked Qin Feng to invite the little heir over. After a while, Mo Xiaobao appeared at the door like a gust of wind. Mother, are you looking for me? Seeing that there was an outsider sitting next to him, the innocent smile on Mo Xiaobao's face gradually disappeared and was replaced with a polite and appropriate smile. Yili smiled and waved at him, this is Queen Anxi of Nanzhao. Come and greet her. Mo Xiaobao then came forward and said loudly, Mo Yuchen greets Queen Anxi. Chapter 754. Princess Anxi's smile widened at the sight of the handsome boy bowing to her. She turned to Yili and said, "You are indeed the little heir of the Prince Ding mansion. My 7 or 8-year-old child is still playing in the palace." As a mother, she always liked to hear others praise her child. Yili smiled and said, "Don't be fooled by how well-behaved he looks now. He is usually very noisy." Princess Anqi thought for a moment, then took out a blue gem and handed it to Emo Xiaobao. She said with a smile, "I forgot to prepare a gift for our first meeting. This is for you to play with. Don't dislike it." Emo Xiaobao took it with both hands and said in a steady voice, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Princess Anqi looked at his serious expression and couldn't bear to part with it. "If my child can be 70 to 80% as good-looking as the little heir, I will be satisfied." Emo Xiaobao blinked and said in a crisp voice, "The queen is like a phoenix. Whether it is the little prince or the little princess, they will naturally be handsome and extraordinary." Princess Anqi was amused. "Then I thank the little heir for his auspicious words." After greeting Princess Anqi, Emo Xiaobao handed the gem to the person behind him and walked to Yili's side to sit down properly. Princess Anqi saw that he was not only handsome, but also well-mannered in his words and actions, as if he was born with a noble aura. She couldn't help but sigh inwardly at how lucky Yili and Emo Xiaoyao were. She lowered her head and stroked her slightly protruding belly, feeling even more expectant. "Princess Consort, the young master and the young princess are here." 2 wet nurses walked in with 2 babies in their arms. Emo Xiaobao's eyes lit up as he stared fixedly at the 2 babies in Yili and Princess Anqi's arms. The 2 babies were very well behaved. They didn't cry or make a fuss even when they were in the arms of a complete stranger like Princess Anqi. Lying in Yili's arms, the babies seemed to feel their mother's warmth and all of them smiled. Emo Xiaobao stretched his neck to take a look. "This one likes to smile so much. He must be your younger brother." The 2 newborns in the Prince Ding mansion didn't like to cry, and the younger brother, Lin, loved to smile even more. As long as he wasn't asleep, he would giggle when someone teased him. Of course, that was only if the person who was teasing him wasn't Prince Ding, Emo Xiaoyao. Princess Anqi held Axayan in her arms and patted the baby's swaddling clothes stiffly. She sighed enviously and said, "Princess Consort and Prince Ding are so lucky. The 3 little princes and princesses are so adorable." Yili smiled faintly and said nothing. After seeing Princess Anqi off, Yili brought the 2 babies back to their rooms before going to the study in the front yard. Just as she reached the garden in front of the study, she bumped into Emo Jingli. Looking at Emo Jingli's sinister expression, Yili couldn't help but want to avoid him. Although she wasn't afraid of Emo Jingli, she didn't want to see him act as if someone owed him 5 million taels and wouldn't pay her back. It was only a slight pause, but Emo Jingli had already seen her. Naturally, she couldn't turn around and leave. Yili could only go forward and nod faintly. Princely, these days, the Prince Ding mansion had been very busy with several important tasks. Not only were they busy with the Prince Ding mansion and the birthday banquet, but there were also people like Emo Jingli who had nothing better to do and came over to chat. However, she didn't know what Emo Jingli wanted to talk to Emo Xiaoyao about today. But looking at Emo Jingli's expression, she knew that the discussion had failed. Emo Jingli stood in front of Yili. He didn't say anything and just stared at her. This kind of gaze made Yili frown in displeasure. She said faintly, "If Princely doesn't have anything to say, this consort still has matters to discuss with our prince. I'll take my leave." Emo Jingli looked at her and said, "Do you have to speak to me like this?" Yili was startled and didn't know what to make of his words. She looked at Emo Jingli in confusion. She didn't understand what he meant at all. She didn't think that her words and actions were rude. Emo Jingli seemed to be impatient. He stared fiercely at Yili and said, "When I broke off the engagement with you, did you hate me so much that you had to help Emo Xiaoyao go against me?" Now that Mo Xiaoyao has taken the Chu capital, are you satisfied? Yili couldn't help but roll her eyes and ask the heavens. What kind of logic was this? Exhaling slightly, Yili said calmly, Your Highness Princely, I think you should remember that after you gave up on the Chu capital, the Prince Ding mansion went to rescue the Chu capital, no, to rescue Chongqing. We didn't take it from you. Mo Jingli choked and said stiffly with a heavy expression, even so, it still belongs to the Dechu state. Furthermore, wasn't the northern tribes and northern Jin attacking the Dechu state part of Mo Xiaoyao's plan? If you didn't help Mo Xiaoyao, would he have taken down Xiling so quickly? Yili was so angry that she laughed, Your Highness Princely, what does the northern tribes and northern Jin attacking the Dechu state have to do with our prince? Could it be that it was our prince who instigated them to attack the Dechu state? Also, I am Princess Ding. If I don't help my husband, who should I help? Also, many years ago, this consort said something to the prince. I don't know if the prince still remembers it. Mo Jingli frowned slightly. It was clear that he didn't understand what she was talking about. Yili said slowly, Delusion is an illness that needs to be treated. I ask that prince consider it carefully. This consort will take her leave. After she finished speaking, she ignored Mo Jingli's reaction and walked around him towards the study. Yili! Mo Jingli suddenly shouted and reached out to grab Yili's wrist. But how could Yili be a weak woman? How could she be so easily grabbed by him? She raised her hand and blocked Mo Jingli's hand. Mo Jingli said in a deep voice, I have something to say to you. Yili calmly said, This consort has nothing to say to Princely. Mo Jingli's other hand reached out to grab Yili's arm. Yili dodged to the side and a cold light flashed from her sleeve, increasing the distance between the two of them. She raised her hand to stop the shadow guard that was secretly protecting them. Yili stared at Mo Jingli and said, Princely, this is the Prince Ding mansion. It is not a place where you can do whatever you want. Mo Jingli was silent for a moment and then said in a deep voice, I have something to say to you in private. Yili frowned and said, This consort has already said that there is nothing to say to Prince in private. This consort respects you as a guest and asks Princely to conduct himself with dignity. Goodbye. With that, she turned and left. Mo Jingli wanted to chase after her, but two black shadows flashed in front of him. Two guards in black stood in front of Mo Jingli and said, Princely, please conduct yourself with dignity. Looking at the two people in front of him who were obviously skilled, and then looking at Yili who was already far away, Mo Jingli finally snorted and left in a huff. When he entered the study, Mo Xiaoyao was sitting in the study, reading a book. When he heard footsteps, he raised his head and saw Yili. He could not help but smile. Princess Li, has Princess Anqi left? Yili nodded and said, I just met Mo Jingli in the flower garden. He looked so strange. What did you talk about? Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled Yili into his arms. Being forced to sit on someone's lap, Yili was embarrassed for a moment. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. He waved his hand and a gust of wind slammed the door. Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile, What else could it be? She scolded I for being despicable and taking advantage of people's difficulties. She also wanted to see if she could take back Chongqing City.